Good afternoon. At this time, I would like to call the special board workshop to order. Will the clerk of the board please call the roll?
Hall.
President.
Solis.
Present.
Segura.
Here.
Tarantino.
Here.
Pike.
Here.
Janney. Here.
Would you all please stand and join me in a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance? Place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to begin by welcoming those of you who are here in the audience section, as well as those that are viewing at home. I want to thank our Director of Communications and Grants for sending out a link to everyone for them to facilitate being able to watch us this evening and next Wednesday as well. The next item on the agenda is public communication on posted items. Per Government Code Section 54954.3, this is the point on the agenda where members of the public may address the board on any item that has been described in the notice for the special workshop before or during consideration of that item. Thank you for your cooperation. And again, I'd like to remind individuals that we would appreciate it if you would use correct language in your conversations and in your points of view. This is in no means an attempt to curtail your freedom of speech, but there are some limitations to that freedom, and we would appreciate that you respect those limitations. Madam Clerk, is there any speakers?
Yes. Gina Vattuoni.
Good evening, school board members, members of the community, Dr. Janney. Sadly, my Lenovo is having a fan error. I've never seen that happen, so I am going to be reading my rough draft. So we see apocalyptic visions of wildfires in Australia, and we know that climate change is an existential threat to our students. We see world leaders reacting or denying that there is a problem. Students are living in a time of increasing volatility, and we need to prepare them for the world that they face. Yet the way we teach and what we teach often reflects a vision of the future rooted in an old American dream and 20th century ideals. When that happens, students get frustrated and feel helpless. Sweetwater is in a crisis right now, and we have the opportunity to radically transform what we do. We need to be proactive and visionary. If I had a magic wand, I would make sure that we prioritize students and teachers learning in the classroom. I would deeply evaluate all existing programs. I feel like often we're treating symptoms and not the root cause, and that's why so many students feel depressed and hopeless. I assert that often our curriculum is not addressing the current realities that we live in or preparing them for a future that they will have to face. You might ask, what does this have to do with the budget? Well, in our society, money connotes, and how we spend money connotes value, and where you're spending your money indicates your priorities. I urge the board to prioritize and give us a vision for Sweetwater for the next 10 years that is inspiring and hopeful. We need a radical transformation in Sweetwater that will attract and retain students. I believe we need to deeply invest in human capital, and my colleagues are passionate and creative, and they're problem solvers. I believe we need to look to teachers as leaders. They know what students need and how to be successful in the 21st century. For example, they know that having a one-to-one program is essential for students' learning. It may not be a program with iPads as it exists now. That might not be the best solution, but we could have a bring your own device policy. We could have class sets. We could check out laptops to students. Together, we can find ways to serve each and every one of our students. The continuing trend in Sweetwater and across the nation is to ask teachers to do more for less and with less. We will not accept to bear the burden of this problem. When we were in an economic crisis a few years back, it's true that teachers graciously took furlough days. I don't think that teachers should be asked to bear this burden now when they were not the ones to cause the problem. I worry for my newest colleagues fresh into the teaching profession, so afraid of losing their jobs, living in fear of a pink slip that does not make someone the best teacher they can be. Today we were asked to plan units based on understanding by design and backwards map purposeful and planned lessons. I urge that Sweetwater plan for a purposeful future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cesar Fernandez.
President Tarantino, esteemed board members, Dr. Janney, thank you for the time. Very similar to what my colleague said, I believe that SEA should not be blamed or unfairly targeted for this situation. We did not give ourselves raises. We don't get to propose adding days to the calendars. We aren't a part of the budget process other than being told that we're the largest portion of it. And in 1819, we gave the district everything they asked for, only to find out that it didn't work out as planned. So I stand here tonight saying to you guys, please protect the teacher to student instruction that occurs in the classrooms. That should be the priority. Okay, that is the primary function of this institution, and this is a true test in a most crucial time for you guys to actually put students first. SEA members get up each and every day and do that work with kids, and we gotta protect that. So what does that look like? In my opinion, it looks like the district office should be right-sized to recession levels. Any loss of classroom teachers should equate to loss of management in the district office. Last in, first out should apply to the district office first. Title funds should be prioritized for site use. And do not strangle sites via reductions in FTE allocations. We've seen some of the newer allocation sheets. There's new ratios in there. What is it called? The declining enrollment factor, brand new on top of what's called the attrition factor, and that leads to less teachers on campuses. Please look into those. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Rob Longmire.
President Tarantino, Dr. Janney, board members, thank you for your time. Routines, high five, fist bump, interlock fingers. How many fingers am I holding up? A year ago, my daughter Riley was diagnosed with level 3 severe autism. Some of the visible signs are highly visible lack of verbal and nonverbal communication skills, very limited desire to engage socially or participate in social interactions, trouble changing behaviors, great distress or difficulty changing focus or attention, extreme difficulty coping with unexpected change or routine or environment. Routines, high five, fist bump, interlock fingers. How many fingers am I holding up? 6 months ago, I took Riley to San Clemente to visit family. We arrived at the strange condo to see all my cousins, aunts, and uncles huddling around the couch and having a good time. Riley immediately shut down, started crying, and buried her head into my shoulder. We were there for 30 minutes or so, and the whole time, I couldn't put her down. The whole time, she could not look at anybody. The whole time, she was crying. 6 months ago. Over the past year, her team of therapists, her mom, and I have developed a series of routines to help Riley cope with the changes in environment and new people. Every week, we do 25 hours of therapy and 12 hours of preschool, and today she is flourishing. For Christmas, I brought her to Los Angeles, to a strange house, with all those cousins and aunts and uncles from San Clemente. Routines. High five, fist bump, interlock fingers. How many fingers am I holding up? Within 2 minutes, she was walking around and doing this with everybody. One of her presents was a baking set with a pan of 6 muffins. I asked her to give a muffin to Auntie. She followed my instructions, and then she was giving her muffins out to everybody. Routines. High five, fist bump, interlock fingers. How many fingers am I holding up? This routine started about 6 months ago. That's 650 hours of therapy and countless hours of practice, all for the sake of progress. Routines. High five, fist bump, interlock fingers. How many fingers am I holding up? Without this therapy, where would Riley be? With this financial situation that our district is in, I am in the position of getting pink slipped in 2 months. If I do not return next year, Riley loses the therapy. We lose her team, and she loses out on valuable time that she needs now in order to get the support to help her be successful in the future. This mismanagement by the district is not just affecting me, it's affecting my daughter, it's affecting families. So in the future, when you're trying to decide how to solve this crisis, I want you to keep one thing in mind. The teachers, the ones on the front lines of education, are not just a number. I am not just a number. Riley is not just a number. Thank you.
Chris Elam.
I'm back. How are you all? Sorry, life got in the way a little bit. I'm passing around. I wanted to apply today's excellent learning. So there's a UBD being passed around for all of you to help guide you in your decision making. I won't read it to you like death by PowerPoint, but you can peruse at your leisure. Some of the highlights in there. One of the things I was looking at today with a colleague over our lunch hour was salaries and the cuts and those types of things. We did some simple calculations that, not counting Dr. Janney's salary, if you take the top 17 admin in our district, you're looking at roughly 3.3 million. Not a math teacher, sorry. If you divide that out, average, including benefits, 100,000 a teacher, that's 33 teachers. I don't know how many of those 17 admin interact with kids on a daily basis. I can tell you, based on our current numbers, those 33 teachers interact with 5,808 kids on a daily basis. So when you're looking at cuts, you need to consider that, and you need to consider the direct impact in the classroom every single day. Along with that impact, going off of what others have said, I really hope that the board members receive the feedback that the teachers gave on the one-to-one program, and it's not just kept in the hands of district who received it, because I think from my experience being at these board members or meetings, directors, program managers, et cetera, come and put on this great dog and pony show, which makes sense. We would all do that for our boss. You're not going to stand up here and go, oh, this was our LCAP goal, and we failed at that this year. You're going to get up here and go, these are the great highlights, because it's what we do as humans. But I think that my understanding that I'm starting to get is some of the board members aren't getting the true picture. They're not hearing from those who are in the classroom day in and day out and how some of these things are playing out in real life in the classrooms. Unlike the previous crisis, and this is something that comes up with random teachers I'm in conversation with under, I can't even say their names, the evil former lords, that affected us personally, including me, directly, as Dr. Janney knows, as adults, significantly. What it didn't do, which is stunning to look back and realize, is affect kids. Like, I don't feel like our students at that time really felt the hit of the crisis when we were under the evil warlords of previous administrations like they are now. Our kids now, day in and day out, feel this, and it hurts. So this crisis, for whatever reason, is much more direct on the students. Pink slip experience, I've done that, been there, done that. I left the district to move back to Colorado for 3 years, came back, so even though I had been here previously, I got pink slip 3 times. And it's, as they're saying, it's miserable, and it will start impacting the teacher's instruction immediately. So you can say, you know, it'll be okay, they'll probably get recalled, da-da-da-da-da. But once you get that pink slip, I remember being at CPM and that pink slip being delivered because I had an administrator who was heartless and actually showed up at nutrition break and handed me the pink slip. Yay. Give me 2 seconds. And it was a nightmare. And I can tell you my instruction from there on out, what did I do? I went home after school each day and I worked on job applications and I sat on EdJoin and I went to interviews and I did all those things. I was not as focused on my students as I should have been because I needed to figure out how I was going to pay my bills. And yes, I got called back 2 of the 3 years. The third time I didn't, and I eventually ended up back here. But it has a direct impact on the daily instruction of our students starting March 15th. And yes, that's towards the end of the year, but that's still a long time. And I get it, state law, blah, 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 blah. But you need to realize that impact that it has on kids when you play with teachers' lives because you're not making the cuts away from the classroom. So thank you for your time.
Julie Walker.
Board President Tarantino, Dr. Gianni, members of the board. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Julie Walker. I'm the president of the Sweetwater Education Association. And I have just a few thoughts I want to share with you. I think some of them have been brought up, but I want to highlight the unintended consequences that we experienced. Even when we did the voluntary early retirement incentive, 2 of you went to the schools and saw some of the hardships that our teachers and our students were facing with our special education. The fact that we didn't have enough instructional aides because so many had retired, so much movement had been done. We still, through almost mid-year, did not have enough support in our classrooms, and we need to keep that in mind when we're looking at any type of cut. That we're hard up for bus drivers. We're hard up not only for keeping our teachers, but also our support personnel who affect the students the most. We've been hearing about cuts away from sites and students. One of the things that I would like to see is a little bit more of working with the labor partners. When you did the budget last year, it was, we're going to get them to take 2 furlough days and $7 million more of cuts. And time, our negotiating team and me personally asked, what did you mean by that $7 million? What did you mean? What more can you take from us? And never did we have that conversation. One other things I worked with Dr. Gianni on is to have a budget, not necessarily just budget, but also an LCFF advisory committee, including your labor partners and community partners. And if we get that going and we get that information from parents, from students, from SEA, SCGA, CSEA, all of these different stakeholders, that you allow that group to speak to you directly and not have it filtered through somebody else. Because, you know, as it was pointed out, you always want to put the best foot forward, but you don't always get the whole story when you do that. Those are the main things. There's going to be a lot more as you go through this budget process that'll come up and, oh yeah, this is something else I'd like. We're not against working with you, but we cannot sell it to our members. Oh, go ahead and take these cuts, take these cuts, take these cuts, with nothing in exchange. No better working conditions, no better protections for our students, especially those that are most in need. We need to keep this away from our students. Everybody agrees. But we can't sit there and hurt our members and their children, having parents having to figure out which kid goes on their health insurance. That's not right. Thank you.
Trevor Angood.
Good afternoon. My name is Trevor Angood, teacher at Eastlake High School, also an alum of Eastlake, class of 2002. In the previous 3 years of working for this district at Eastlake, I've taught human geography, criminal law, AP government, U.S. history, AVID 910, AVID 11, and AVID 12. Last year, I served as the blended learning specialist for Eastlake, and this year I serve as the teacher librarian at Eastlake. While I cannot say that I'm speaking for all the district librarians, I'm here to speak in support of the librarian position, its continued support and success. In reviewing the job description and duties listed as a part of the board exhibit 5J for this workshop, it felt necessary to speak and point out the fact that the library in this document only covers a small aspect of what occurs in this district at the library. The library can help with the discovery of materials for students and staff alike. To paraphrase a quote by Neil Gaiman used in my research databases lesson, the librarian can help you find the right answer or book or resource when Google can bring you back 100,000. The library is a print shop for projects where the librarian solicited for advice on text choices, pictures, and design on poster boards, and making sure formatting is accurate for papers, though some could have been turned in digitally if laptops were available for all students equally. The library is a space for groups to work on perfecting their crime scene for a class. I promise, for a class. The library is a space that allows for groups to effectively research cross-examining witnesses in their mock trials. The library is a space for planning skits and foreign language classes to hone public speaking skills or to film video projects for the school bulletin. The library, in support of LCAP goal number 2, provides solace for students who need to see someone like them in a book when they might feel alone or different. Someone who is on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, a student practicing one of a myriad of faiths, a student of one or multiple of the many nationalities and races served in this district, or a student without a permanent place to lay their head at night. I am proud to purchase, curate, and house those books and get excited when a student simply asks, I'm looking for a book to read. The library provides shelter for students. In the 15 instructional days between November and December breaks, my library saw an average of 202 students. This is not accounting for the rainy days during lunch when I have over 180 students for the lunch period alone and cannot process sign-ins fast enough. Average lunch period sign-ins clock in at the high 80s at Eastlake, although I should also state that lunch sign-ins increase as the temperature both increases and decreases. The library is expanding to reach students where they are and feel comfortable on their phones. You can follow Eastlake Library at ELH Library on Instagram, where quotes from the first line of featured books are presented in support of First Page Friday, which can be found on our website, www.elhlibrary.org. Shameless plug. Our website allows students to look for their next great read, access research databases, or help connect to our different classroom resources after the bell has rung at the end of the day. The library, depending on librarian abilities and expertise, can support when other programs and positions are cut or reduced. While I was sad to see the blended learning specialist position cut in the face of technology being a significant opportunity for growth by both student and staff alike, I'm excited as a librarian. I need 15 more seconds. Thank you. I'm excited as a librarian to potentially continue that work, to be an educational technology resource or mentor in a location easily accessible as I complete my master's in educational technology at Cal State Long Beach. The library in the 21st century is changing rapidly with open, flexible study areas, makerspaces, group collaboration, seating, video studios, books, ebooks, 3D printers, augmented reality experiences. The list goes on and on. It is up to librarians in their professional expertise and knowledge to be the stewards of these spaces in support of the goals and needs of the school and the district. I hope that the importance of librarians in the library in this district is nothing short of emphatically expressed and felt it necessary to rise and speak on this critical topic today. Thank you.
Tom Leet.
Good afternoon, Superintendent Janney, Board. I'm Tom Leet, teacher at Eastlake High School, resident, taxpayer, and voter of Otay Ranch, and I'm here to talk about two things about budgeting today, which may be totally obvious to you, but I feel the need to say them. One of my current jobs is as the treasurer for Sweetwater Educator Association, and I've now put together exactly one budget, and I don't yet know how good it is, so clearly I'm an expert. That being said, in that process I learned, and now I see better what's going on here, that something to pay attention to is that in any budget, there are fudge factors. Look for things in your budget that are multipliers, that are predictions of income that might happen, predictions of students that might be here, predictions of expenses, and know that those fudge factors, those multipliers, are things that are under your control, and that as you slide them up and down, you have some control over what you plan to spend. Now, as a union treasurer, when I'm sliding those sliders up and down, I'm just determining whether or not one more union member on a training mission is going to be able to have a nice lunch or not, and that's not a big deal. But you have people's jobs in your hands, and you have your children, our children, in your hands. And so when you move those sliders and you make those predictions, remember they're real people. That's point one. Point two is, once again, I'm going to restate the obvious. You need to start with making sure that you remember our fundamental job is the education of children. And that when you make choices, you got to start with that in mind and ask that question constantly. How critical is this to the education of our children? And in fact, I want you to pause during this process, now and in the future, and look around this room. because you're surrounded by pictures of our children doing things in this district. And what they're doing is what you should be funding. So I want to give you kind of a mental construct on how to prioritize. Ask this question. If this weren't here, when you're looking at any given thing, if this weren't here, how many days could we do without it before it affected education? And whatever that number is, that's your priority order for that item. So like if that number is 10, we could go 10 days without this. Okay, that's a level 10 priority. If that number is 100, oh, that's a level 100 priority. That's way down there. If that number is 0, we have to have this every day or it affects education. That's a top priority. And if you can keep that in mind, then you're going to make some smart choices for those children who are on these walls looking at you. All right? And that's all I ask. Thank you.
Bettina Rondow.
Hi, everybody. Katina Rondo, I'm from Hilltop High School. I'm the special ed teacher there at the Learning Center. Mr. Tarantino, Mr. Pike recently visited me and kind of saw what we do there. My whole entire career has been serving special ed students in alternative settings. I worked at Alta Vista for many, many years. I see a greater number of students with depression, anxiety, and frankly, just students that do not fit the main campus mold. They just don't. And so we need alternative settings for them. We need to serve these alt-ed students, and I know that you two were speaking to some of my students and they appreciated the flexibility that we had, or you can come in, at this time or that time, and 2 hours wasn't even enough. We need more days, we need more hours, because the way we're set up, it's 2 hours of seat time and then 4 hours of homework, and just come and take your test and, progress forward. We need this alternative ed program, because otherwise, where do we end up and at what cost to society? I'm a foster kid. I was in there for 11 years. I made it. My brother didn't. He still sits in prison. And that's the cost when we can't get it right. He wasn't afforded an alternative ed program. That's why I do what I do. If you've never heard the pipeline of prison, look it up, because that's the alternative. Alt-ed is not just for these horrible homes, This district serves many cities. We've got the mayor of one of our cities or grandchild's in our alternative ed. This district serves many school districts. We've got board members' kids in our learning centers. So even those well-to-do, wonderful families, you find your kids in need of an alternative ed setting. I just ask that you really consider all of that when you're making these cuts. Just don't forget about those kids that are most in need, because where will they end up without that opportunity to get their degree? I have 2 students this month that turned 18. I received a senior who had 8 credits. Well, he's not done really well in the eyes of the law, and 8 credits is where he came to me. We've got him up to 16, but to tell him he's going to be in school for another 3 years, forget about it. I don't think I can retain him, but what do we have? We have our adult school program. So it's like, what am I doing? I'm trying to work with my director to get him over to the adult school. So he's going to finish. Both of them will finish, and we're not going to lose them, and they're not going to end up in that pipeline to prison. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marco Amaral.
Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. Marco Amaral, Special Education, Castle Park High School. I'll start with something that you've been hearing. It's just getting harder and harder. Today I had lunch. By the way, 1 hour lunch. I was like, oh, that's incredible. Today at lunch, I was having a conversation with my work husband. And he's gonna leave. He's gonna leave the district. He's going to 2 years to El Salvador to do incredible things. And I don't blame him. And I'm shaking because I don't usually shake up here in public and whatnot, but we come into education, I know you know this, but sometimes you need to rehear it. We come into public education because We truly believe in its foundational goal and its foundational mission. And we believe in its promise. And the decisions that the district is inquiring about in regards to its budget keep us further away from that promise. It doesn't get us closer to that promise. And it impacts directly the people that will get us closer to that promise. Your teachers, your instructional assistants. We come to this profession with the most loving of intentions. And it's decisions like this, or potential decisions that you could make, that can really strip us of that love. You know, we have board members. You know that there's always an alternative. We just gotta look close enough. There's always an alternative. Pero hay que echarle ganas. And we need to communicate and trust one another and talk with one another and work things out. Porque que se puede, se puede. You know, and I'm just saying that the people that are behind me right now, these are your best allies, board members. These are your best accomplices to accomplish the goals that you set forth when you ran for these positions. These are your best allies. And that's not to disregard the allies that you have in-house as well. But the people that care about the future of this district and of their kids, and of its kids, are the teachers and educators behind me. So support them, and you're going to support the promise that you fought so hard for. Thank you.
Terry Zielinski.
Good afternoon, Dr. Janney and board members. I'm just going to give you one example of a friend of mine's daughter. She was attending Eastlake High School, and she couldn't walk into a classroom with 40 other kids. She was so overwhelmed by the huge number of faces in that room that she left. She's now going to a charter school. If we continue to make cuts in the classroom, we're going to have more kids like Alyssa who are too overwhelmed. Classes get bigger. We will have more kids leave, and we'll have more kids going to charter schools, and then we'll be in a bigger budget crisis. So the cuts have to be as far away from kids as they can possibly be. Thank you.
No further speakers.
Okay, at this point, I will turn the workshop over to our facilitator, Ms. Casadas, and welcome. Thank you. Again.
Pleasure to be here. I'm sitting today.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm going to start standing at a point. You have to turn on your mic.
There you go.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Just want to start off by saying thank you to everyone for being here, whether you're here, outside on the dais, and to all of the members of the community. We all have families, we all have friends, we all have dinners that we would otherwise be at, and I sincerely appreciate taking that time and being willing to be here, to be a part of this difficult conversation. So sincerely, thank you. We are going to spend some time together today fully acknowledging that we've got some really hard decisions to make, and some hard decisions to make in the short term. It's coming up, and it's coming up soon. I'm going to start us off, if we can go to the slide deck. I pointing to?
This computer.
Over here. Thank you.
Turn it around.
Turn it around the other way. There we go. All right. Thank you. Want to start off by just recognizing that the conversation is going to be hard. And so I want to start off by just thinking about the team that is here. It can sometimes be really hard to have these conversations and forget the humanity of it. And so as we first to start off by looking at the team and knowing the team that's here, and I'll turn over to Dr. Janney for that piece of it, but just if we can just make eye contact with folks, right? Humanity matters. It matters to me, and I know it matters to all of you, and that's why you're here. So if we can just start off by just letting folks know who on the team is here tonight for this conversation.
Thank you, Luce. So we have on either side of the board, we have our cabinet members that are here to support the conversation. And then we have some additional people in the audience that have been part of a conversation, a planning committee, a budget planning committee. Several of our principals are in the audience, and some other directors are part of that conversation as well. So we have in the audience Ana Pedrosa, Maribel Gavin, Juan Ulloa, Julissa Gracias, Karen Hernandez, Malena Aubrey from HR, Maria Esther Lizarraga from Curriculum, Tom Winters from HR, Griselda from State and Federal, Dan Winters, also on Cabinet, Scott Hendries from Labor Relations. On this side of the room, we have David Delicasada, also part of Cabinet. Do you want to introduce the rest of the team? Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Janney. So from the finance team, we have Nancy Picconi, who's our Director of Fiscal Services. We have Veronica Plummer, who's our Position Control Analyst. And we also have Athena Corliss, who's our Debt Service Manager.
So, did you hear that?
The bus.
Could you say one more time?
Sure.
Probably drives through and they keep saying, "What did you say? What did you say?"
So we have Nancy Picconi, who's our Director of Fiscal Services. We have Veronica Plummer, who's our Position Budget Control Analyst. And we have Athena Corliss, who's our Debt Service Manager.
All right, thank you for that. During one of the comments, I remembered there is the mission of the IB program, the International Baccalaureate program, is that lifelong learners understand that other people with all of their differences can also be right. Right, that's one of that just sort of always hits near and dear to my heart. I'm originally from the Midwest. And that's where it ends up showing for me sometimes, in that memory I have of growing up in a place where people really strongly differed about what they believed and how they believed it, but we all still sat at the same table. All right, so for today, here are our outcomes for our time together. So at the end of this workshop, this is what we're looking for from the board to be able to accomplish. And we will check ourselves at the end of the board meeting. And so the desire here is to get to a place where at the end of our workshop, I will ask the board to raise your hands and let us know whether you had an opportunity to voice your ideas, to ask you whether you were able to ask the questions that you have, and whether you were able to guide the prioritization of the needs of our students, because that's why we're here, based on our LCAP goals. So those are the outcomes that we're looking for today. I want to start off by grounding us in our stage here. And I'd like to just take a moment for the sake of intentionality of why we do this. This is not because today our mission is more important than it was yesterday, or our beliefs are more important today than they were the day before. It's because the conversations are going to be hard, and when conversations are hard, it's helpful to have those things front and center. And so to start us off, I would like to ask someone, one of the board members, if you could please read off our mission statement.
Our mission, located in the heart of an international border community, the Sweetwater Union High School District ensures a safe, inclusive, collaborative culture that empowers each student to actively engage in a meaningful educational experience to pursue personal and academic success.
Thank you. And then I'd like to ask us to read off those belief statements. And I want to ask you to read them off and make me believe it. Make me believe that we believe each student can succeed. Start with you.
We believe in welcoming community that is inclusive, equitable, and promotes positive academic, social, and emotional well-being.
We believe relationships and collaboration matter.
We believe resources shall be equitably distributed to ensure the success of each student.
Like that emphasis on each.
We believe in the value of community voice in decision making.
We believe in a culture of trust based on integrity and transparency.
Thank you. And here are our LCAP goals. And one of the things I very much appreciate about us here in Sweetwater is that they are everywhere. Everywhere I go, I can see them in frames, I can see them set up, and I appreciate that that it is what we live. And I'm going to guess that if I asked folks what are our 4 LCAP goals, most folks would be able to cite them off, and I appreciate that that's not always common, and I appreciate that very much about Sweetwater. When we take all of those pieces together, the commonality of them, like where they all lead us to, is the fact that the work we do is aimed at meeting the needs of students. And we do have some things here that are unique in Sweetwater that I've not seen in other places. And I've worked in multiple states, I've worked in multiple school districts, urban, suburban, big, little, small, like we're talking Chicago big. And the comprehensive equity plan that we have here, that is special. That is absolutely special. And again, that ability to focus on those goals and know those goals, those are all things that are special about Sweetwater. And it's important for us to keep these things in mind as we're having those hard conversations. And so that's going to be part of our challenge, is to have these hard conversations, keeping our students front and center and focusing on their needs. In your governance handbook, and you've got a copy of your governance handbook, we do have our set of norms that are established. And if I can ask someone just to read off for me some of our governance team norms that we agree to follow.
Sure, I'll start with respect. Do not negate the opinions of others. Learn from each other. Show respect through body language.
In collaboration, share ideas, and problem solve.
Positivity, do not attack each other. Work to find common ground.
Trust. Trust each other. Earn trust by doing homework.
Was that me? Open communication, share thoughts and ideas, and ask questions.
And this is going to be an area of focus for us, because what staff is looking for, what we need right now is your guidance and direction. And so that's what we're looking to get. We've got some hard recommendations coming, some hard decisions to make. And so this is that opportunity to ask those questions, to share those ideas, to express those concerns, and we'll have lots of opportunities to be able to do that. As in with anything, in order to do better, we have to be very intentional about it. And so I do want us to think a little bit about this one, and I propose an exercise for us. We're going to take a moment to first reflect and write individually, and then we're going to do a pair share, and then we're going to share out some ideas. So as board members, I'd like to ask you which of those norms do you excel at modeling? Which of those norms do you struggle to model? So which ones are you good at and which ones are you not so good at? Because we want to make sure that we're continuously improving our place as community leaders and how we approach this work to ensure that we are getting to those good outcomes for kids. So we'll start off by, I'll give you a few minutes to just reflect and write on your own. What are some of those norms that, I'm going to go back to the norms so you can see them. Which of the norms are you good at modeling, and which ones do you know you struggle to model? When you're ready, if you just look up, make eye contact so I know you're ready to go. Now I'd like to invite you to get into pairs and discuss what you know you're good at and what you're not so good at. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6. So discuss in pairs.
Any?
Just we'll have an opportunity to go into all of this stuff. You don't have to. You don't have to. Because we feel we have to, but you don't have to. I hear you. It's an automatic, isn't it? It's an automatic to just say it. Yeah, it's okay. All right, just to wrap up those conversations. Just wrap up those final thoughts. I can't. It wasn't a stop. It was just a wrap up. It was just a wrap up.
Thank you.
Now you're on.
Thank you for engaging in that. I imagine that could not be easy, right? It's not easy to talk about the stuff that we're not so good at, and so I appreciate you delving into that. That's not going to be all for share out, but what I would like, now that you've had those conversations with one of your peers about what it is you're good at, what it is you're not so good at, I'd like for us to select a prompt on how we're going to support each other when we start to slip into one of those things that we're not so good at. So for me, I tend to not just very quickly go into the problem solving because I want to just get stuff done, and I don't stop long enough to really pause and reflect and think about something. And so if I were to start doing that, what I'm asking for is what is that sort of prompt we can give ourselves to remind our colleague respectfully, kindly, gently, civilly that maybe we're slipping. So just, it can be something as simple as just, a hand goes up, touch your nose, whatever it is you want to do, just some way of just selecting a prompt that we're all going to share, that when we see someone slipping down a path, we kindly help pull them up out of that path. Mm-hmm. All of those would be appropriate. Pull in the ear, tug on the ear. Is everyone good with that one? Yeah. Okay, so tug on the ear, and that just, when your colleague's making eye contact with you, tugging on the ear, it's just letting you know, hey, we've agreed to these norms. This is how we're going to get stuff done. Because again, the conversations are going to be hard, right? The conversations are going to be hard, and so finding those ways of making sure that we are going to get the work done. Getting the work done means that we are behaving ourselves in a way that helps us get to that finish line. Okay. All right, so thank you for that. All right. In your governance handbook, and you have a copy of it, I want to tell you one of the things that I sincerely appreciate about your governance handbook is that you have all signed off on it, right? It's not just a document that exists that is available on your website. It is a document that the board came up with together and agreed to it together, and not just agreed to it, actually signed off on it. Like, signatures mean something, right? I know when I sign my name on something, that signature on the dotted line is meaningful to me. And I imagine that's also true for all of you. So I just want to highlight a couple of sections of your governance handbook, and there's a copy of it in your handout. So on page 2, we have the roles of the board and the superintendent, and they're there at the bottom of page 2. So you're all reminded of what the role of a superintendent is, what the role of the board is. And then over on page 6, we have our board meeting guidelines, right? And again, this is what the board has agreed to in terms of how board meetings will be held, and how we will make sure that we're getting our work done by abiding by those guidelines. And now we have the tug of the ear to remind each other when we see one of our respected teammates maybe going slightly off path. We help each other stay on the path. With that, are there any other areas of the governance handbook anyone wants to lift up or highlight? I'll give you a moment just to look over it.
On page 6, under board meeting guidelines, where it talks, the fourth bullet says, everyone's opinions count, semicolon, we will be open to the ideas of others. I mean, I just think that reinforces one of our belief statements, that not only do relationships matter, but that opinions of others matter as well, but that we'll still be open. I think that's really, really important in a time like this, especially.
Especially at a time like this, yeah. Thank you, Dr. Janney.
I'll just add that with the sixth one, where it states, "We will respect differences and will show." I'm sorry, the one up from there. When we have a difference of opinion, we will debate the facts and avoid personalities. We will address process, not personalities. And I know, recently we've had some disagreements, and that's going to happen. We're not always going to be on the same page, but I don't think we've ever gotten personal here. We've always just voted and moved on, and gone on to the next agenda item or gone on to the next meeting. And I really appreciate that about the board, this board.
Thank you for that.
For me, the second to the last, we will be supportive rather than judgmental. And I think that that not only applies to us, but also to staff. And I think that, I think staff is doing the best that they can. And I think that we should be supportive of them in the jobs that they do under the circumstances in which they're doing them.
Thank you. Anything else anyone wants to highlight? The expression that came to mind is about the being hard on issues and soft on people. All right, so with that, we're going to get started and look at some of the critical pieces of data for us as we have to contemplate how we're going to prioritize the use of our resources. So first and foremost, enrollment. We have been in declining enrollment over multiple years, and it shows. As we all know, we generate revenue based on attendance, what's known as average daily attendance. And the concept there is simple, right? It's the tush and the cush. We need the student in the school, in the classroom, in order to generate revenue. And do we all know why do we take attendance? Because we get paid. Anyone else? Why do we take attendance?
Kids can't learn if they're not in the classroom.
Yep, they can't learn if they're not there. We're legally required to. If you're not in school, you are truant. Yeah. So that's why we take attendance. It just so happens that in the state of California, our revenue is based on attendance. The purpose of this chart is just to keep in mind a couple of two key factors that we need to think about as we contemplate the impact of declining enrollment. So we spend money based on that top line. We spend money based on enrollment. We generate revenue based on that bottom line, based on attendance. And so if I have a class of 24-1 in kindergarten, I'm spending money on 24 students. I'm going to have my 6 tables with 4 chairs and supplies for 24 kids. I've got my teacher in the front. I have all of the things I need purchased for those 24 kids. If only 20 come to school in any given day, we're only generating revenue based on the 20, on the ones who are showing up. And so one of the critical pieces to keep in mind is what that means for us, right? It matters always. It especially matters when we're in declining enrollment, because we will lose revenue faster than we can implement cost efficiencies that go along with the loss of those students. Actually, I'm going to go back. Someone mentioned, one of the speakers noted that the importance of assumptions as we figure out what our budgets look like over the subsequent years. The reference was to fudge factors, but the way another terminology is assumptions. One of the ways that as a board you can think about the veracity of an assumption is to simply ask for what's called a sensitivity analysis. And so staff works really hard to make their determination of what they think what that enrollment decline is going to be. For the board, you can ask, and what if it's a little bit better? What if it's a little bit worse? Right? We'll still be working off of staff recommendations, but having that sense of what does the world look like if it's a little bit better, a little bit worse. It's simply called a sensitivity analysis, and you have a very skillful CFO who I'm sure could turn that around and no problem, and probably actually thinks about it all the time as she's developing the budget already. Here we have our general fund, and there's 2 points that I want to make here. So one, on the revenue side, you'll see a very significant portion labeled LCFF and another portion labeled other state. Those two pieces right there, that's 89% of our general fund revenue. And those two pieces together essentially mean we're relying on the state. So in those years, when the state has a good year, we have a good year. When the state has a bad year, we have a bad year. When we were in the midst of the Great Recession and the state had really bad years, we had really bad years. Right? So that reliance that we have on the state is significant. And it is, again, that's one of the things that's different about California than most of the rest of the country. On the expenditure side, we know, as we were hearing today during public comment, it takes people to educate kids, right? We provide a service, we don't make widgets. And in order to provide a service and educate kids, it takes people. And so accordingly, we spend most of our resources on people. That is wonderful in many ways, particularly when we see those years when we receive more money. In the years when we're struggling with things like declining enrollment, in those years when we're struggling with costs going up at a rate that's different from our revenue, it can hurt, right? And we can see here, when it comes time to make some of those reductions, it's really hard to make reductions without looking at the people portion of our budget. And please note that the non-people side, that non-personnel side, is going to include things like utilities, insurance, transportation, right? There's a lot of other pieces that go into that non-personal side that aren't avoidable. Okay, let's see. Multi-year projections. So here's one more data nugget to note. We are looking for reductions in our spending. At the point we were putting this together, it was at about $26 million. But we recognize that that's a point in time. And I'm going to note that, fully recognizing how frustrating that can be. Oftentimes what we'll hear is the number keeps changing. Why does the number keep changing? Yes, it keeps changing. And I would submit to you that it should keep changing, because with every passing day we have better information than we had the day before. So as a just really timely example, today we know what the governor's proposed budget is. We didn't know what that was 2 days ago, and that impacts our multi-year projections. So with that in mind, when we went to print, we were at $26 million as the needed solution for the upcoming fiscal year. And we do now have the proposed budget that's come out. And so I'd like to turn it over to our CFO for an update.
Board President and Superintendent Janney and board members, I'd like to provide an update because, as Luce mentioned, it is, and I've shared in prior board meetings, it always is a point in time. So as of Friday morning, Governor Newsom released his preliminary budget proposal for 2021. One key assumption, as we've been talking about assumptions that come into play when we're looking at the multi-year projections, is the cost of living adjustment as it rolls into the LCFF, the local control funding formula. That's a basis for funding. When I presented to the board for first interim in December, and based on the governor's final budget in June, the projected cost of living adjustment was a 3% factor. So that's what a lot of us, other districts, other finance folks were using. What I had shared last month is that the Legislative Analyst Office had indicated that it might be as low as 1.79. What I shared during the board meeting at the time was it could be about a $5 million additional shortfall, because that's a loss of revenue to the district. What Governor Newsom released on Friday morning was a 2.2 or 2.29% COLA. So it's favorable than what we were hearing from the Legislative Analyst Office, but it's still an impact to this number that you see here at 26 million. It's more like about $3 million. So that 26 would now go up to 29 because it's less money that we'll be receiving based on the initial assumptions and projections. The other point that I'd like to add, what Luce mentioned, and we've been talking about as well, is enrollment. This is also, this assumption at first interim was assuming we had 38,157 students for 2021. As each day passes and as we continue to monitor, we had P1, which is one of our measurement periods in December for student enrollment. Those numbers continue to decline. So when I come forward to the board in February, actually as we do our work in February, but actually in March for second interim, there could be another possible change. There's a risk. There's a risk to our budget as we continue to move forward for 2021.
Thank you, Dr. Selgood. Okay. And we do know, right, that it's the current year, the 2021 number that's changing, and the subsequent numbers will change as well. And we don't yet have the Department of Finance's estimate for COLA for.
Correct. So when we look for 21-22, when we look at that cost of living adjustment, when you make an adjustment in 1 year, there's usually changes in those out years. Department of Finance will release that hopefully soon, here within the next week, or we'll also receive guidance from School Services of California. So there could be an impact to those out years.
Yeah. Thank you. Actually, I'm going to pause over here in case there are any questions for Dr. Selgood. Nope. Good? Okay. All right. So I want to just do a quick recap and then think about sort of where we're going forward here. I know over the past couple of years, Sweetwater has been deep in the work of improving some of its practices. We've had the review by School Services, we've had the support of the county, and so we've been doing things like implementing. There's the position control analyst or clerk that's now been hired, and there's a position control team, which sounds like that they've been engaged in some very deep work that's changing the system and adjusting the system to ensure that the budgets that we're looking at are as accurate as can be. And I do know there's been plenty of work the superintendent has been doing. I had the pleasure of reading some of the announcements that the superintendent is sharing at every board meeting to help keep the public informed about what's happening with those shifts. Let's see. If I think about the FY 19-20, just do a quick recap. Right, there were some hard decisions already made this year, some eliminations already made this year, some efficiencies already accomplished this year. And then we've got to think about what's happening next year. So you've got some challenges here for next year and the next year out. There have been some one-time and some ongoing pieces to those challenges. But I do want to just take a moment to think about given the target that we're talking about here is 26 million, now 29 million. If there's any thinking or thoughts or questions about that, I'm happy to take them.
Sure, I have a question there. So, in my opinion, given what we just heard about, where we're short 29 million for this year, and then at least 7.8 for next year for 21-22, I think we should try to balance that budget, come up with a budget for these 2 years so that we know it's a bigger number, yes, so it's almost $40 million. I think that's the number we should shoot for, so that we can address this as we are today, look for solutions, hopefully come up with collaboratively with some good solutions, and work to try to get this done for the next 2 years, and then come up with a strategy in terms of what we could add back if there's more funding that comes in and we don't have to go that far, as far, if we have to let, bring things back, bring people back, that sort of thing. That's, that's my thinking on this, so that we're not back here next year doing this again, so that we have 2 years of where we could focus on instruction and learning and go with that. That's how I feel about it.
Why don't we pause for a moment and give your colleagues a moment to just sort of take that in, maybe ask any clarifying questions if there are clarifying questions, and then we can get to a place where we think about what that target might look like.
I have some. It's not really a question. It's more of a piggyback onto what Mr. Segura said. I'm not sure that. Am I confident that these projections are even really showing us the true picture? I don't know that they are. I think we have to plan very conservatively. We have to do what's essential. That's what we can do at this point in time. We have to have a clear picture of what's essential and what we must, I believe, plan to put ourselves in a positive position, and leaving our balance of $154,000 is not going to be a positive position in 2 years. And we do need to ensure that students in the classroom and the delivery of instruction is our primary focus. That's all I'm going to say.
When you say positive, you meant positive certification.
Yeah, I mean, having a positive ending balance, what I'm seeing here is $154,000 for a district of how many people? Delivering how many services? And in 3 years, do we feel that there won't be other increases to gas, to the lights, to the hard costs of this district? No, I don't believe that that means we won't have those increases. Seeing that the COLA is going to be lower than expected, and probably in the out years maybe lower than expected, we can't expect to even have a balance based on COLA. So I mean, I don't want to get into too much of the weeds right here. I would like to hear from staff. I want to hear about the solutions or what's going forward, but that's where I want to hear. What I want to hear is what's essential, and I want to see the focus on the classroom and the students.
Let's just take a moment, reflect on that, and I think to the ask at the table about coming up with a target amount that would cover 2 years. I'm wondering what the other board members think about that.
I respect what Mrs. Hall has said in terms of, I wish we could have a definite amount, but based on what we've been told all along is that it's a huge guessing game until the end. And so how do you get to those definite numbers if everything is constantly in flux and changing, sometimes literally by the minute? Where's that sweet spot? And how do we determine what that sweet spot is? I don't know. I'm not a budget analyst, and I'm not a finance person. But when things are constantly changing, how do you nail something down? It has, in my opinion, or at least how I see it, it has to be our best guess at that time. And then you have to accept the fact that it's going to change and it's going to be different. If there is a way that we can nail it down, I'd like to know about it, because right now I just see it as a huge guessing game.
I agree. It's always changing, but to use a word that reminds me of a past president, and probably a star on SNL, to be prudent. We really need to be creating our own projections and our own needs. We have to see what our needs are and what we can afford. And we cannot work on maybe it'll be this one day and maybe it'll be that. We have to decide. We have to make that direction. That is the responsibility of being prudent and fiscally sound and being the responsible parties that we were elected to be. And yes, it's a hard thing because I can tell you right now, if this was based on assumptions from last year, even with the governor's budget and some of the language in that showing that, yeah, we're going to give you guys more money to LCFF, or that's all based on the fluctuations of the economy. Prop 98, it's up and down. So we have to know that out of the norm, here's the base we can plan on, and we have to plan accordingly. And it will be conservative because, number one, right now, we have no reserves. We are paying $250,000 or more to borrow money so we can pay our people. Those are the hard facts, and we have to work through this information and not try to make it seem like we're, we cannot plan anymore like it's going to happen. We have to say, the worst case scenario, here's what we have. Here's the worst case scenario. Let's plan to that because we are going to expect that. If we survive that, we're going to be good. And I agree that teachers have done a tremendous job. Staff has done a tremendous job in keeping over the years, Sweetwater has always had excellent education. But I can tell you from my own experience, my own family's experience, when all this happened during the recession and during the prior board, the students and the teachers were suffering then too, and families were, because we heard nothing else. We heard about nothing else. Teachers were not using that time because of how it impacted them. So being right is to do the right thing now so that we can plan to have stability in this district.
Could I just have Jenny, Dr. Salkeld, talk a little bit about the assumptions? Because, we heard about the fudge factors and the assumptions and some of the numbers on this page, and maybe just to, not just for the board's benefit, but for the public's benefit, because they may not have been here during first interim, to kind of talk us through that and how she got those assumptions and things. Would that be okay?
Please. So as was shared with first interim, we had a couple of slides and a summary as well included in the packet. We look at each element of this example here. When we look at revenues, usually it's information available by the state, by the Department of Finance or the governor. So we use the latest information there. It tends to be pretty static from June until now. We can have additional factors to start planning ahead. So it tends to be a little bit more fixed. What can vary is that enrollment number. So if you have a fixed amount per student or per ADA is where that revenue can change. And again, these were shared with the board in first interim when we take that opportunity to also then look at that for second interim. As it relates to the expenditures, we also look at that during those reporting periods to see how are we trending, how are payroll costs looking to what we budgeted, how are our contracts or our supplies looking to what we budgeted, and we make adjustments at that point in time too. We do have factors into our out years that also tie to guidance that's provided either by the county or School Services of California when we look at factors such as the Consumer Price Index, which is a little over 3%. That's a factor that ends up building and increasing costs over time. So we do spend time looking at all of these elements, but it's almost in essence an industry standard as well from what we rely on School Services of California or Department of Finance. So that there's a commonality in some of those assumptions, knowing that things may change, and as Luz mentioned, it is a point in time. One thing I would like to clarify is our reserves, the district's reserves. As we've shared, yes, for 1920 there are no reserves, but as we shift to then move to a positive certification, you'll see in those columns C, D, and E on row 13, for a district this size and per the education code, we do have the required or the recommended reserve noted of about 9.5 to 10 million. So I know there's a line item that says net balance. I think it was referenced at 154,000 for 22-23. We actually do have 2.2. So our budget plan does reflect a restoration of that economic uncertainty of that reserve so that we can get positive certification. One thing to note, try not speaking here from a generalization standpoint for other districts in the state, but this district's payroll on a monthly basis averages about 22 to 25 million. It just depends on what, that particular pay cycle. So if you even look at that economic uncertainty, that's not sufficient to even cover a payroll. And I don't think that's unusual for Sweetwater. I think that is, be ideal to have that. But that's the state's recommended reserve amount based on the student enrollment.
So, question to Dr. Sockeld. Would you say then, based on what you've just shared, that you are representing a worst-case scenario? And if not, question to Ms. Hall, what would be the determining factors to determine a worst-case scenario? Understand the question? First to you, is this represented as the worst-case scenario? And if it's not, then to Ms. Hall, what would be the factors that determine the worst-case scenario? I don't understand.
I'll start with the first question in terms of based on our assumptions that we had with first interim and because of the new developments as of Friday with the governor's budget, that number for 2021 is more between 29 million and 30 million. We can build an extra buffer for that year to have any other variation, but that's the best information we have right now for 2021. Things could,
Go ahead.
and things could change in the out year, but we do not have that number as it relates to revenue, the cost of living adjustment. That has not been communicated to school districts yet. So that could change in the out for 2021. So where we're at today, that's the number that I'm sharing with the board.
Okay, then to Ms. Hall, what would be the factors that you feel would be used to determine a worst-case scenario if this does not represent a worst-case scenario?
This definitely doesn't. I don't feel this is close to being the worst-case scenario, but I do feel we need to be more mindful of those factors that could, I think, looking at the LOA at 1.79, if I was planning, I would plan for that to hit like that instead of planning a 3% COLA. That's one thing. The other part of it is when you look at how the governor's proposal is, he's putting a lot of restrictions in funding streams that are, whenever you take away for one particular group of students, it means that you're lowering everything else for everybody else. So as long as he's creating specialized pockets of money, we're either going to have to do more oversight over those, which creates, that doesn't go all straight to the classroom, or into a base funding model where schools really have local control. So, I mean, you have to plan for that too, that those things could materialize, limiting what you're going to get as a district, as we saw last year in the special ed funding, where it sounded like, great, they're giving it, and it turned all out to be all for early childhood. Mm-hmm. And even then, it wasn't straight into special ed money. That money went into the unrestricted funds for districts, so they didn't have to keep growing the contribution or the maintenance of effort that they had to maintain. So there's all these moving parts, yes. So what do? You have to kind of hit your target. If it looks like it's going to be 29 or 30 million, I think you plan for worse, Can
I offer just a couple of observations? So I think, one, I do want to circle back to that idea of a target. I think we need this is some of the guidance that staff is looking for, is what should they be thinking about and bringing back as they're thinking about those priorities, as they're thinking about student needs. What is that dollar amount target that we should be aiming for? And so I want to make sure we land somewhere on that question. To Trustee Hall's point about being prepared for a scenario that is worse than what is assumed here. It's probably, I would say, most of the time when school district finance folks are establishing their multi-year projections, it's based on the most likely scenario. It's based on the on that best information you have available at that point in time. And Dr. Salkid, she recited exactly the ones that are the standards that we use in this state. They're exactly the same ones that I've used historically, that every other CFO has used historically. And when we don't use them, we have that asterisk that explains why we didn't use that one in that particular moment. But to Trustee Hall's point, being prepared for a worst scenario, an opportunity to do that, a method, a strategy that the board might consider is by establishing a reserve level that is higher than that minimum, right? You can develop a strategy that says, you know what, it's 3%. 3% isn't good enough for us. We don't feel confident enough in a 3%, and so we want to get ourselves to, I'm not going to give a number because numbers end up sticking, but let's say X percent, and we want to get ourselves to X percent in the next 3 years, 4 years, right? Then we have a plan of something that we're getting to be able to protect ourselves from exactly those sorts of scenarios that come at us, right? And those scenarios that come at us, they're not totally uncommon, right? We plan for we can have a year where we have one bad flu season that will impact our ADA. What happens when it's 2 bad flu seasons, right? That's a significant impact to average daily attendance. It then becomes an impact to the number of substitute teachers we have to hire because they're also out with the flu, right? Those are all things that can happen that impact our budget, and we can have a buffer, a safety net, by agreeing to board policy and establishing a higher level of reserve because the current one we have doesn't feel safe enough.
Can I talk? Mm-hmm. Thanks. Am I on still? Okay.
You are, yeah.
One of the things is, personally, I was always about not holding a whole lot of money in a reserve because of the way it, we're not a for-profit institution. We're a nonprofit, right? We are there to educate students year to year based on the funding we receive in that year. So I've never been a proponent of growing reserves at the cost of not providing those services that are so crucial and needed to students in the year that you get that revenue. So I'm cautious about that, but having been through this experience where all of a sudden we thought we had a 3% reserve and we walked in one day and it wasn't there. Clearly, I think we've all learned from that. That was a worst case scenario. I can just, but I think there's a balance there. I agree there's a balance, but I think that's a discussion too. I would really want to hear from our partners who work here, the people that are paying, I don't want to use taxpayers because we all pay taxes. I mean, that's just a ridiculous perspective, in my opinion, to come up here and pound it about how taxpayers, because we all pay taxes. And I know I have a large part of my payroll every month goes out and I don't ever see it. So I think we owe it to everybody to hear their take on that, because it is one of those things that will always come back to us later saying, you're holding all this money. And one of the first things we did as a board, one of the first things I asked for, and we all agreed and is tell us what is all that lump sum, because it was around $15 million when we started here. And we didn't know what that was all about. And a lot of it was dedicated to certain you know, not just an undesignated pot reserve, but was, you know, in fact, reserved for specifics, and we sometimes went along and changed some of those specifics. But I think that's where we have to really be mindful of what's in our budget, what is really line by line, and know what is key, and what can we say this is for now, for until we come out of this, because we keep hearing it. You've heard it. We've all heard it. There's a recession coming, and there's always ups and downs with education and enrollment. And, you know, could be 5 years from now, we're going to have an influx of kids into our 7th grade. You know, that happens because they're all down in the elementary right now. And people will understand pretty soon, sooner or later, that charter they chose doesn't really want them. They don't really want to serve them in the way that a public institution like Sweetwater will. But I'm not going to get there. But I think, yeah, we have to think and balance that whole direction as we think about what we're going to do here.
So then I'd like us to kind of go back to what Mr. Segura said then, because he said, let's look at the 29, which is the 26 plus the 3 from the COLA, plus next year's 7.8, which gets us to 36.8. I mean, his recommendation was to look at developing some budget reductions to get us to that number. And if we have to get there, we have to get there. If we don't, then the board determines which are the ones on the list that come off first. So I think that's kind of what you were asking the board to kind of consider at this point is.
So I would actually love to hear from Trustee Pike and Trustee Solis. We haven't heard from you on that thought.
Well, I'm agreeing with what Dr. Janney here is saying. I'm just curious as to what the idea behind it. It's easy to say, okay, we're going to split this. We're going to get 36 million. Okay, how are we going to do that? Where are we going to start at? That's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking. I know we have money that we need to balance, but we also need to figure out. I think the most important thing is how do we start?
And does the idea of looking at the 2-year total sound palatable? Is that something you can support?
I think it's a very good idea, yes.
Please.
Thank you. Yes, I'm like-minded with Ms. Paula Hall, thinking of the money that we get should be for the students, and I think a big part of our student learning is, of course, our teachers. So I'm always on board to making sure our teachers are well taken care of. So it's hard to say, yeah, let's go for a bigger number, but then we miss out on what we could have done for the kids now. So it's like Paula said, it's a balance, and I mean I'm open to going up, but I don't know about going up that high, because then the kids currently now are going to miss out, and it's tough. And I think if we see line items of to see what's important and what's not important, so we can start chopping things that aren't, and a lot of the input from our stakeholders, of course, is very important.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is then the board would be willing to look at combining those 2 years and having staff work on something that represents spending reductions that are going to be greater than that 29, so that the board has the ability to contemplate making reductions, approving reductions that would be greater than the solutions that are needed in 1 year to get to that minimal amount.
Right.
Okay.
Because we don't want to be, like you said, we don't want to be redoing this again.
Right.
But I think we will be. I think we will be by next year, because the other out year has got 10.5 million, and in the governor's proposal and what it seems to be Gavin Newsom's following in the footsteps of Governor Brown in putting funding out of Prop 98 or into one-time dollars, and you can't. We won't have the county approving budgets that are putting ongoing costs into one-time money, and in that out year, 2023, 22, 23, all the the retiree costs are coming back. We had help with them this budget cycle, and there's a proposal in next budget cycle to help again with one time, not ongoing. So in the out year, they're going to come back, and that is going to be a huge hit again. So while we are going to go and be advocating, constantly knocking on on the legislature's doors, we need to be reminded of that and plan. Yeah, you can plan now, and then we'll be there next year. We're going to be right back here again next year. So how do we do that? I like Kevin, you're right. We need to start looking at it and saying, what are our target? Start with the $35 million if that's what you feel comfortable with. And I think we need, once we get through that, we have to plan for the rest of it because it's going to come.
Okay, so yes.
Attached to that, I would like to see the unintended consequences that accompany that, particularly as it relates to our asks to our labor partners, because we have been very cautious about asking for more than we think we need. And so, not asking for more, not asking for more than what we need. And so I'd like an analysis in terms of the unintended consequence that this would have. I'm okay with, I think it makes sense to look at 2 years in a row. I agree with Trustee Segura that, we can't keep doing this every year. We need to focus on other things. And so, but I would like some kind of analysis of unintended consequences that at least we'll be aware of. And I think the more that we're aware of, the more informed our decision will be.
Okay, so 2 thoughts then I'm taking away, 2 the takeaway points here. One, that the board supports the idea of staff looking at 2 years worth of solutions to get us in a better position more quickly, because the goal is to get to positive certification. And then 2, with that idea of that understanding that we need that buffer there, what we can do is maybe just provide some samples of what some of those board policies look like when those reserve levels are established at a level greater than that minimum requirement. Obviously, we're not tying our hands, we're not agreeing anything, we're just going to look at some samples. And I've got some specific samples in mind because they tell the story of how those reserves were built. So not necessarily like making additional cuts, but then waiting till the end of the year when you close books, and then some of those salary savings drop down. Instead of just letting those salary savings drop down to the bottom line, we take those salary savings and then we use them to start establishing that safety net. And that's essentially what the reserve is. It's a safety net. So those are the 2 takeaways here. Thumbs up?
I think that we need to be cautious about what we're going to do with any savings at this point and just concentrate on how we're going to balance a budget.
Yes. So, but those 2 takeaways, though, are we thumbs up on those? Yep. Okay.
Are you sure? Because I heard you say, maybe up to that 7.8. So I'm just trying to get some clarification for all of the board.
I think it's fine because we're not agreeing on it. As long as they get to see it and then go from there, that's fine.
That's right.
And
This isn't our final decision.
No.
Yeah, this is just guidance for staff to know what are they bringing back. Are they bringing back 26 million? Are they bringing back 20 million? Are they bringing back 2 years worth of solutions?
So when are we going to talk about some of the specifics that we're going to focus on?
Next.
Okay.
All right, so those are the 2 takeaway points we've got so far. All right, let's see. At this point last year, the board engaged in a conversation. They were asked the question of what does each student need to succeed? And here's what we came up with. The reason we have to engage in this sort of thinking, the reason we have to come up with these sorts of priorities is because our resources are limited, and this is going to be where I will be a broken record tonight. We can do anything that we want. We can't do everything that we want. And so thinking through and being clear and as precise as possible about those things that are important that should be the basis of the priorities of what we're establishing on how we spend our resources is critical. And so I just want to give you a moment to remind yourselves of where we were a year ago, and just ask ourselves, are we still there? Does this still feel right? Do we need to adjust based on the fact that we have made some spending reductions already, right? Our kids look different today than they did a year ago. And so I want us to take a moment and think about whether or not this is still the scenario for our high, medium, and low for the way we prioritize the spending of our limited resources, because we can do anything we want, but we can't do everything that we want. So just take a moment. And my question to you is, does this still feel right? Is this, do we need to contemplate adjusting, adding, taking away, moving?
I'll start. I'm looking at this through the lens of the actions that we've taken. That we've taken an action to be a restorative district, that the focus this year is socio-emotional learning. And I'm looking at our high priority, and I still believe that all of those factors support the actions that we've taken. I would like to add nutrition, because if students are not fed, then they can't learn. I don't care how you slice it. And a lot of our students, yeah, no pun intended. A lot of, you're like me, the jokes don't fly. Sorry, Dr. Jenny.
They fly.
They fly now? Okay, I got juice. I think that, for a lot of our students, school meals are the only source of nutrition that they get. Both parents are working. And so, I think there's a reliance on our school breakfast and lunch and nutrition break services. I really do. And I think that fits in with what the actions that we've taken. And I don't see that we have to do a subtractive process for this. I really don't. I think that our priority is our priority, and then we work to see how it fits in.
Any other updates, anything that feels different this year than last year? And remember, this is right when it came time to staff thinking about spending reductions and what came onto the list, it was to focus on the high. The items that we identified as the high impact ones were the ones staff used to determine what made its way onto the list for the board to consider.
I have a comment. These are great, in the cloud goals. Pie in the sky, these are, and I think it's important that we must be expending money only when it's essential at this point. And my hope was to better understand what the essentials are, from the programs to small expenditures. Not everything that's budgeted is essential in times like this. Just one example, while I greatly appreciate Dr. Cazares' backstory and her credentials and her skills, I would have expected our superintendent to lead this work, and I think she should explain why she can't, because that's another expenditure we didn't have to make. I think we've missed a lot of opportunities. We've actually pointed out in several different ways where some of these cuts should have been, and I think some of the opportunities were squandered over the last year and a half. So I'd like to know, when we talk about it, I want to get more into the discussion about what is central now is not necessary, and what is in the classroom that is part of this that we need to continue, that's actually being delivered in the classroom in the school. So I think part of that discussion has to be what we're talking about, not just this, the cloud stuff and the feel-good more. I want to get into the nitty-gritty of what we're doing.
So this, just to highlight here, right, this is how we get to the nitty-gritty. What you're describing as essential is what was listed last year as the high. And so the question for you is there something there that's under the high impact piece that you believe is not essential? Right? That's the word that you're using, but it's the same concept.
No, what I want to know is, where do we have, I want to start getting to the budget. We have very little time left, folks. Very little time. This should have been already done. We should have been having these conversations over the past 4 years. That was part of our vision, prioritizing so that we could really have, now it's time to get in the nitty-gritty, and it's already 6 o'clock.
Yeah. So prioritizing.
Don't give me that, because I'll tell you what the priority is. Teachers are the ones that are delivering the safe and secure environment. And what I've had told to me over and over again, and I keep going back, I've asked, could you look into this, because I hear this is going on at the school. Teachers aren't safe. They're not being able to discipline the kids. They're having multiple kids with high needs into a classroom where a teacher has no aid. No, they're supposed to, the model for that is co-teaching. There's no co-teaching. So where is our safe and secure and someone who cares when the people that are delivering all that one-on-one to our students, which matter, are themselves degrading day by day because of the stress they're already under? So we have already, and I know every board member here and the superintendent and all her staff have already probably discussed what's in the central office. We have central, we can look through the vacancy list and see what isn't getting done. It's all classified people that are vacant in here. The workers that support the schools, that go out and fix things. There's a shortage of instructional assistants. That's a problem. You have analysts that are working, I'm sure, beyond their capacity, trying to put all this information together, and they have a vacancy. I want to know how they're doing, how are we looking at the priorities, and where are we going to get down to the nitty-gritty of what can we do without, because really any certificated person here in the central office could be out of school right now.
So let's get to the rest of the board. So, because I do want to know whether what was established last year, which again, this was the basis for the recommendations. So does this still feel right? So I did hear Trustee Tarantino note that the nutrition piece feels different this year than it did last year. And that's probably because there has been a slowdown in the economy. And so we probably are seeing more kids that are hungry at school now than we did a year ago. And so shifting that over from medium to high. Is there anything else there? And again, I want to stress, like this is what guides the work that staff does. Right, so they come up with those lists of what it is to prioritize, what comes to the board as a potential reduction, and what doesn't come to the board as a potential reduction based on what is established as a need, as a priority. In the same way that staff would not come to you with a 2-year target unless you're saying, come to us with a 2-year target. And so note that. Like this, is there another shift that needs to be made up there? So nutrition to from medium to high is an item for the board to consider to see whether or not that's a shift we want to make. And I'm going to guess, I don't know if our nutrition services program requires a contribution. Does it? It's self-sustaining? Okay.
Yeah, very minimal.
Oh, recently self-sustaining. Okay, so know that, right? If it becomes more of a priority, that would then most likely require a contribution from the general fund into our nutrition program. Is there any other shift up there that you see that either is what felt like a high last year, but we know we have to make spending reductions, and as we're making spending reductions, it means we can't focus on it.
Right. So I have a hard time equating that to the support that we have for the students. I mean, just what it says. I mean, feel safe and secure. Is that, the teacher, which that's what they do, or is it the facility? And then someone who cares, that's the teacher again. There you go. Support for mental and emotional well-being, that could be the counselor, I would imagine. So we have ratios with that. We're going to need, and teacher, supplies and materials, we're going to need that, whether that includes, the current computer, the one-on-one initiative we have going, in place, and then the well-maintained physical plant. You can't really ignore that because it just costs you more money in the long run. So I don't know how.
It feels pretty essential.
Yeah, all of that does to some point. How that breaks down into different departments within the district, that's a whole nother, we'll get there with that, but
right.
That's a whole nother.
Right, and it's then these layers that allow us to look at the work that we're doing district office, right? So when we've got on the list of things to consider the contracts, both district office and school site, right? That's one place. We've got positions and programs that we're looking at district office, and this meeting is focused specifically on district staff plus certificated. The board session, the board workshop for next Wednesday is where we'll be discussing classified positions, right? So that's the divide. And as staff looks at all of those things, this is their guiding force, right? This is the guiding force that they will use to make those determinations of what programs, what staffing to bring to the board for consideration based on these priorities. And so I know I heard one shift, nutrition moving from medium to high. And I would love to get a sense from the other board members. Is that a shift that
I don't agree with that, because number one, I agree that kids need to be fed. Do I agree that all kids are eating at our school in our nutrition program? No, I don't agree that they are. A lot of them choose not to. Some of them get out of school and go somewhere else, or if they have friends, bring them food. I mean, so is it as high as, yeah, it's as long as they're maintaining the program and being able to deliver their nutrition to the schools. Some of that model has to change, if there's going to be any change to that, the way the either centralized prep of the food or something. But I don't think that should shift over in this climate. We need to look at where we can really reduce, starting with real on, pointed.
Right, so I'd love to hear from the rest of the trustees about this idea of where nutrition belongs, whether it's high or it's medium, because again, it's the guiding force of what staff will use as they're determining what comes to the board as a possible reduction.
Well, I think our nutrition person has really turned the program around and is actually making money nowadays, so he's able to acquire more, if you want to say barbecues or whatever they happen to be serving. I'm a West Side guy. I live in Westlake, not Eastlake. So our schools on West Side, our kids are always hungry, let me tell you. And they can always use meals. And believe me, I will bet you they're in line to get the meals. So I think it's important for us, and I think it is, nutrition is a special, because being a kid and you're hungry, you don't function very well.
Right.
So you need to, our elementary schools give free breakfasts, free lunches, it's important. And so I feel like Mr. Tarantino that it should be maybe moved up. And I don't see a problem with it because, like I said, the person that's now in charge seems to be changed it around and has it in a positive way. And so it's actually making some money, not losing. So.
Thank you, Trustee Pike.
So I'll weigh in on that. I would say it's good where it's at. I mean, if we were, had money, yeah, we could maybe bump it up. But I think, the times that we have, I think it should stay there. I have two kids in the district schools, and they have friends over. I asked them questions about the district, and I asked them, do you eat at school? And they say no. It's not because the food's not good. Most of the time, it's because they don't want to spend their time in line when they have, they'd rather just socialize. But there are a number of students that's where they eat. My kids are fortunate they have food at home, and so I think it's good where it's at.
Yeah, I think it's important as well. But I think staff has been doing a good job with what they have. So I think at medium, I think if we leave it there, I think it's fine. I don't think we should look into moving it up.
Okay, so then with the idea of leaving it as is, just thumbs up, thumbs sideways if you can live with it, and only thumbs down if this is absolutely unacceptable. Okay.
I don't think
Okay,
it's going to suffer the way it is, so.
So you'd leave it as is?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to leave them then as is. And I do want to note, right, then this is going to be the same level of priorities. So the mindset that staff will use as they're looking at the fact that we can do anything we want, but we can't do everything, as they determine what are those spending reductions that are coming to the board, is a critical one. So as we start digging into the handouts in your binder.
Liz,
Oh,
can,
yes.
can we take a break?
Oh, of course you can. Yes.
All right.
Do we do a 15-minute?
15 minutes would be fine.
Yes. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. If somebody doesn't ask, I will just keep going.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and reconvene. Cáceres, all yours.
All right, that is on now. Okay, so we are going to, given this is where we're landing, so it's the same set of high impact priorities as last year. I want to start by looking back at what are those spending reductions that were approved and implemented for the current fiscal year. And so in your handouts, it's Exhibit 3A, and it's the cover sheet of the board item that was presented in May of 2019. And then behind it is the list of the positions that were approved for elimination. So I'll give you a moment just to find your place and refamiliarize yourself with the list. When you have, if you could just look up so I know you've had a chance. Exhibit 3A, got it. So I wanted you to take a moment just to refamiliarize yourself with the list, is as the team is thinking about the process and the reductions to bring forward to the board for consideration in the month of February, I think it's important just to take a moment and just reflect on some of those lessons we learned. And so as you think about this set of reductions that we've already made, that have already been implemented, is there any lesson we learned in that process that leads you to a thought or a recommendation in terms of a shift we might want to make to do something differently this year than the way we did it last year, so that staff is aware of that feedback and guidance from you? So just take a moment and think about, just reflect for a moment, jot down any suggestions you have on something that you might want to see us do differently this year than last year in terms of how those, the reductions were implemented, how they were contemplated, how they were brought to the board, and how they were implemented. Yes.
I have a question. My recollection is that we also implemented some other kinds of cost savings that were passed on to that impacted sites, district office, and conference travel. I don't remember the exact percentages. I want to say maybe 10% reduction in staff and site budgets, maybe 15% to district department budgets, and then a restriction on travel. So are those still in
Yes.
place,
Right,
in
so-
addition to the positions that we cut?
Yeah, so I believe, we have Dr. Salkid right here, but these are strictly the positions.
So we're just looking at positions and not the other stuff as well, but they are still in place?
Yes,
And
nothing has been
and
restored.
ongoing. Okay, thank you.
I'm noticing here, Mr. Tarantino and I have been to several special education areas, and they're definitely in need of instructional assistance. So we've had 5 last year, and I would really like to see not only none, but maybe an increase so that we can get some qualified people over there to assist them in special ed.
I think that we should, first of all, understand that some of these were vacancies that people took to serve, and that was what the first step in right-sizing the district, and we still have more staff than we're overstaffed. That's what I hear from not only teachers and other people, from directors and outside people. So I think that's one of the pictures we have to paint. And we also have to see, I agree, special ed assistants, it's my understanding across the county and across the state, there's a shortage. So you can create as many positions as you want, but if you can't fill them. So one of the things I would like to know is where are we overstaffed? But I want to know, I feel that the central office is key. The people that are currently in central office positions that could be working in school sites, that's where the first priority of staff needs to look for reducing.
So what I'm hearing is one sort of this distinction of what is happening between special education versus general education. I said versus, I shouldn't have, but just in distinction of general education. And then two, that difference between where are we right sizing based on our enrollment, based on our purchasing power, based on all of those factors. So where are we just right sizing versus where are we actually making a reduction that would impact services and program? And I think specifically you're asking where are we overstaffed?
Because this is one board's opinion. Programs are there. Our board agrees that we feel that some of the important work to be done is restorative practice. When I go to school sites, a lot of times it sounds like it's just a box being checked. And I don't know that over the last 3 years, there's been a significant impact on how that works. So if a priority is really about it being in the classroom, if we direct that more to the state, I think the schools need to be delivering that, and efforts at the schools need to be, that's where the concentration of the work needs to be done. That's just one example. Mm-hmm. So I want to see that, and I think that I got pushback on that from the superintendent in the past, and I don't think we can have pushback anymore.
So Mrs. Hall is absolutely right. What you see, the positions on this list are positions that were vacated from the SERP, right? Because our intent was to eliminate positions and not people. And so this is just a reminder of some of the positions that were eliminated. That doesn't mean that I know for a fact that Mr. Winters is here, and he could tell you that we have had probably way more than 5 instructional assistants for special ed rehired, well above that. This is just a reminder to the board and to the community about which positions have been eliminated. Yes, we still have a lot of work to do, and this year, there's going to be a bigger impact even. But this is just a reminder for that.
Any other lessons learned from the process last year that we want to apply to this year?
So I would just add, thanks for clarifying that, Dr. Janney, was that I was wondering to know if this was all from the SERP, that work that we did in the past. And I definitely, believe that when we get down to it and figure out where we have to make cuts, that it is far as possible away from the classroom, and, that it's, and I don't see how we make cuts if we don't start at the management level in the district office to show an example of this. That shows you're a leader. There has to be cuts at the top. If you're going to ask for cuts at the bottom and all the way through, you're going to have to start at the top, the management level. Assistant soup, I'll be Pacific assistant soup level. Maybe reconfigure some of those into eliminating some, and that work's not going to go away. That work's still going to be there, but we got to figure things out on how to save as much money and use that money to keep as many teachers in teaching our students, and that's what I believe. Thank you.
I have a different perspective, and perhaps it's because of my time in the district as an employee, but I think that the district office positions are essential for oversight, not only in terms of programs, but also in terms of continuity and consistency throughout the district. And there was a time when the district office staff, assistant superintendents, directors, they were all slashed. And what we ended up with was 23 different ways of doing things at the site. The principals basically had no direction, they had no oversight, so they did what they wanted. This was before we had a general counsel, and if they had a question, they picked up the phone and called the lawyer. And we had to pay for that because there was no oversight and they weren't being told, you know, you can't do that. You have to go through channels. And so my concern is, I don't know, maybe I'm counting wrong, but on the education side of the house, I see Dr. Alvarez and Dr. Fulcher. On the certificated management side of the house, we have Dr. Aguirre, we have Ms. Carbuccia, we have, I know I'm not, Dr. Sochheld, and I think that's it. So, oh, you're on the education side of the house, Dr. Glover. I'm sorry, because, well, yeah, you straddle.
David
So,
Delicazada.
anyway, you know, so I don't know. So, who do we cut? Who are the assistant? And you look at Fulcher, and Fulcher's dancing as fast as he can.
Can I?
Well, let me finish, and then you
Yes,
can.
well-
Okay. So that's my concern. That, you know, we're going to get 23 little different ways of doing things. There's not going to be consistency. And, you know, the district office, the key role is to provide support for the school sites and the principals. And, you know, that's their role. It's not just to sit here and look pretty or drink coffee and talk on the phone or delegate. I mean, they actually do provide support to the sites. And I believe that they're important. And where do you cut? I don't know. That's my concern. And again, it's based on past experience. And I know I get criticized a lot for that because I do have that historical perspective that my colleagues don't have. But for me, it's real.
Excuse me. I apologize. I thought you were done, so I just jumped in.
No, I just took a deep breath
Okay.
to calm down.
Yeah, so I'm not here to say they are not, anybody isn't valued. And I agree, there's a lot of things that have been done here, and I think the bulk of the work where we have seen a true impact has been with our classified management. The structure put in for all the bond money and the facilities, and that turnaround from what was going on before, the lack of control. And I believe that the general counsel has been invaluable in resolving so many, not just lawsuits and all that. You know, we know all that from what's been, you know, we've been in those sessions, but also from the labor side of the house. I think we heard what that impact was to labor. So I agree, there's definitely places, there's also restructuring that could be done to, I think there's a real, opportunities have been missed where there could have been more restructuring. I don't think the superintendent did enough reduction when the SERP occurred. And they, you know, that was key. We would have been in a different place right now had that occurred.
Can I have an example?
And I can't say that, yeah. I can say that we, at least two of us, gave at
No,
least
an
two
example of
Now, I can't
different-
talk about what we talked about in closed session, but I know two of us agreed on an approach that didn't get listened to.
Let's pause. We never want to talk about closed sessions. And remember, right, we're helping each other by that tug on the ear, right? That tug on the ear is how we're going to support each other, remembering the norms we agreed to, the governance handbook that we all signed off on. So just that tug of the ear when we need that support from one another to remind ourselves of what we agreed to in terms of the norms that we would follow. So the the purpose of looking at this is just to get some of those ideas in place. Because, right, there's never a perfect process. We probably learned some things along the way in terms of how those reductions were implemented for the current year. And we don't want to repeat those mistakes. And so if there's something that comes to mind as we get refreshed on this and we think, oh, we did it this way, and what if we tried it this way? If there's any of those other things that come to mind, make a note. We'll come back to it so that we make sure that these sorts of questions, as we're coming up with those spending reductions that'll come to the board in February, staff is thinking about the fact that we want to be mindful about special education, and we want to be mindful about the difference between right-sizing and decreasing. We want to be mindful of restructuring opportunities for the organization. Okay, so with that, let's actually move on to looking at some of the details. You've got a hefty binder with you that includes multiple references. And so those are just sort of resources that you can make use of as a question comes up when you're looking at some of that nitty-gritty. There's an opportunity to look at some of those references. And so the references are listed off for you. And they're all the ones that show up at the beginning of the binder. And so there are things like that define our resource codes, that have the calendar for work days for all of our positions, as well as a couple of handouts from school services that help translate education ease and budget finance ease into lay terms. I thought the easiest place to start, and yes, I said easiest because this is just going to get harder. The easiest place to start might be looking at contracts. And so Dr. Salkett is going to guide us through some of those materials that we have here in front of us. The contracts piece is section 7 of your binder. And I think everybody's there. And I'll hand it off to Dr. Salkett.
We wanted to also start here because in terms of our budget, as we shared in one of the previous graphs, about 87% of our budget is in people costs, where the remaining 13% is in other costs. And as Luz had mentioned, factors such as utilities are kind of those fixed costs, that can fluctuate based on need and utilization. However, of that 13% is where we also have contracts comprised of that. And so we're in section 7. And so what we've displayed here, these are at the school site level. Again, the goal in all of these subsequent pages and what's been posted online too is for the alignment of LCAP number 4 with transparency. So we did provide a lot of information to share with the board and the public. So what you see here in this Exhibit 7A, as it relates to the schools, is what we call the 5,000 object code. That is typically where contracts and so forth are identified. But I need to put in context that when we distribute funding to the schools, and on average they get about $53 per student at the middle schools and about $72 at the high schools. That is what's deemed as their site discretionary. We work with principals and their site staff to then allocate that money between the 4,000 object codes, which is typically is supplies, and then this 5,000 object code.
So that was 53 at the middle schools and
72 at the high school per their enrollment when we do their budget projections, when working with them for planning ahead. So what you see here at the school site level, this is and you have it again by resource. This right here is unrestricted. So they work with their school site staff. A lot of the fixed costs at the site level relate to, you'll see duplicating services or things such as the leases and repairs for their copiers. That in essence is a fixed cost. Duplicating might be their programs, such as you see there with Bonita Vista High, they could for their graduation programs, and some other items that they may have. So they're very much bare bones, I would say. I think over the course, and I think Trustee Tarantino mentioned this earlier, there were some reductions in the prior year, so we've maintained that number going into 1920 and how we're planning for the subsequent year. So this is very much, we work very closely with the schools monitoring this activity. They do have that flexibility, like I said, to move budget between 4,000 object codes and 5,000 object codes, but they have to maintain within those amounts. It's allocated to them.
If they have any unspent dollars at the end of the year,
That does not roll over. That falls out to the bottom when we're looking at where we end our year with our fund balance. That is savings that falls out.
In this schedule that you have, the transportation services, those are for what? For sports events and
Okay.
other things? Or it's not the transporting of students to the school
That
on a
is
daily basis?
Working with our athletic department with Joe Hines. We worked with him closely with also the principals this past year to develop, we looked at 3 years prior activity to develop a baseline for the sports activity. Plus, there's a amount too that for charter buses where our department's not able to transport our students, they do have a budget allocated for charters. But again, adhering to the contracts.
So at what point does a principal really have control over the budget, the discretionary budget at their school? Is this, it seems to me that we should provide that to the school so they can run the school that they, right? And the decision-making about where they take away to, that should be a site decision and not our decision. I think the sites have to have a budget to run on. As I recall, part of the conversations we were having I was meeting with Joe Hines and some parents and interested parties around coaching stipends, was the fact that a lot of the budget for the athletics went into refurbishing the helmets. So is that part of?
That's in here too. They do
That's
get
all
a
in there.
5,500.
It's really up to them to say what they can live without and what they can't.
That is if we provide a fixed amount, it's 5,500 at the high schools for that refurbishment, and so they work closely with Joe, so that's fixed. They cannot move that budget into other areas. The intent of those monies.
So is this just unrestricted dollars for the 5 zeros? Do you use a different resource code for that?
It stays in the 4 zeros resource code, and we work with them as part of our budget guidance. We let them know these dollars are earmarked for this purpose. It's a lot of guidance from finance or also from the athletic department in managing that.
so just make sure I've got that right. So you work with the athletic department to determine the need and the amount. That dollar amount is provided, and then they just don't have the discretion to move it out of there.
Especially in the transportation area as an example, because transportation is very unique. What gets allocated to the schools has to have a corresponding offset to the transportation department. Those two line items have to stay in balance.
So do you
They
use
can't
different
take
extended codes or something?
We have different elements of our chart account, cost centers.
Okay.
And tracking the activity plus the location numbers for each of the schools.
And in this past year, transportation got together with athletics and some principals. Can you talk about that process, please, Dr. Aguirre?
Yes. So last year when there was a decision, when we went through furloughs in order to maximize it, part of it was to look at some of the retirements that occurred. Also looking at some of the, maybe some limitations or kind of parameters we could put around transportation. So one of the things we did is that we looked at athletic transportation and we made some reductions around weekend events and also in terms of closure for when there's a break, whether it's the winter break. So combined with kind of those different reductions that were made, this is where we're able to kind of control some of the costs in terms of athletic transportation.
But even on top of that, you all met to talk about what would be an appropriate. So they looked at the past couple of years of budgeting for transportation and versus charter schools, and they came up with a reasonable amount for every school based upon their own individual use.
Right.
is
So
what my recollection was.
when that happened, we invited a group of principals and APs, athletics, department, transportation, and it was a work group. And we turned around with some recommendations in a fairly short order. But yes, we work very collaboratively with our school sites when it comes to athletic transportation in order to contain some of the costs. And it was a working group that met for, I would say, about 30 to 45 days, and we were actually able to make some changes in pretty short order.
Reduction on, it really was driven by how much money you needed to reduce out of your budget? Was that how you targeted the?
I think it was a balanced approach. That was a consideration, obviously, as we were trying to reduce costs, but also balancing the need to provide support for student athletes. So that's where we brought in, again, the athletic department and principals to be able to provide some recommendations so there would be a balance there, and it wouldn't just be kind of a bottom line consideration, but also how does it impact students to be able to find kind of a compromise.
So how did that formula work? I don't get it.
I wonder if for that
Well, I would like to know because it impacts their schools, because I remember them talking about how that was hurting athletics. And for some of us in the west side, that matters a lot because we don't have big booster clubs supporting those programs.
Okay.
We don't have big, so that's
I think he's
part
ready
of
for
it.
the answer.
Yeah, well, I don't necessarily have it with me right now. What I can tell you is we looked at, as Dr. Sawkel mentioned, we looked at the previous 3 years of expenditures and arrived at a point where there was an average that was identified. Again, I don't have with me. We can definitely provide a follow-up memo or Friday update.
Is that by school?
It was by school, correct.
Yes, sir.
I have a question about duplicating services. Are school sites being told that if they need business cards or any kind of duplicating services that they are to use our duplicating department for those services, or are they still allowed to go outside? And does this amount reflect going outside or staying inside?
This amount is reflective of both inside within our department as well as outside services.
And what would be the rationale, since we have a duplicating department, what would be the rationale for a school site to go outside of our department to have work done? I guess, I don't know that you can answer that, but that's my question. What would be the rationale? We have an internal. I know that at one time, well, last year, there was a snafu about the graduation programs because there was only one person who knew how to do it. That person retired, and it took 8 months to retrain somebody. That's what I was told. I don't know that it's true. I didn't check it out with Dr. Aguirre, but that's what I was told from the school site. So they all went out to have their graduation programs duplicated. I'm assuming that the 8 months are over and we have someone trained to do that now. So can we I guess my question is, long story short, can we mandate that they can't go out for anything? They have to use our duplicating services within the district.
And that's an area that actually reports to me. And so with the retirement, we did work closely in getting communication out with schools because there were some factors that we need to consider with training individuals. But there are some items, as I recall, that in the programs needed some type of foiling or kind of printing, as our units don't have that capacity. So there were specific requests that our units of our printer cannot accommodate.
And I'm assuming that foiling is part of the school culture and tradition and cannot be changed.
You're talking about for graduation?
For graduation programs, yes.
But it seems to me that a budget can be limited, and any additional could be on that's where the school site is given money, and they decide what their priorities are. That's what local control really means. And in some cases, just like what that to me is a good, they want to have it extras. That's a good cost for the ASB if they have that kind of funding to pick up on.
And we did also, so speaking of ASB, there were some things with graduation. There were the diploma covers. We had some schools who wanted to have that where others could not. Some could afford it, some could not. So it did create a little bit some inequities, and we did talk about ASBs covering those costs. But those are examples that the schools are making those decisions.
Aren't those sold as a package plan with the cap and gown?
Some are.
Not everywhere, not across the board? Okay.
Well, I think
At the middle school.
I think what we're looking at here is how many of our contracted services are really managed properly through a purchasing department where it's all, it's not one for this gets and one for that, because there's purchasing power when you do it together. And I think we've seen a lot of piggyback over the last couple of years brought forward for different contracted services. But it sounds to me like there's still work to be done in that area. I think that has to continue, right? So in some of these things, like there's coaching for intramurals, and I mean, every school doesn't have that kind of budget probably to work with out of their unrestricted funds or their
Coaching for
this is I'm on the wrong page. I'm probably more in central office.
I have another question. Mailroom services. I know that the person who was in charge of the district mailroom retired. I don't know if that person's been replaced or not, but what exactly at the site does mailroom services refer to?
We could have mailings that they may issue in bulk. I know that a lot of the testing materials, I believe, I think that we have annual testing requirements, that gets charged at postage, that gets sent out on behalf of the school. They'll give us that information and
Okay.
documents in bulk, and then we process
Okay.
those in that area.
Okay, so anything that can't be done by flyer or on the website or whatever else, then that's what that cost is. Okay, thank you.
It seems to me that we have the people sitting out there in the audience who are the principals who probably could shed some light as to.
You don't want to put them on the spot.
Yeah, how does that work, ladies? I mean, when it do you
Gentlemen.
gentlemen? I was just looking at these ladies. I'm thinking, you guys will know, right? I mean, do you put the frills on there? Is that where the extra money comes, or does the ASB help you, or how does that work? Go ahead.
So whatever we can get done.
Do you want to come up to the podium?
So Juan Way, Ranch Del Rey Middle School. So whatever we can get done at the site with our copy machines, we do that. We do not send things to duplicate unless it's things that we cannot create at the site level, if it's too complicated. And then we send it to the district. But beyond that, we try to take care of everything on site to minimize costs for my budget.
Good answer.
Common, yeah. Right. So, and I'll just note, right, if we look at the school site piece, the grand total at the bottom, it's 1.544 million. And so now let's move over to the district side.
So the next schedule is Exhibit 8A, and it's a pretty lengthy document, but a couple of elements of this item that I'd like to share with the board and the public is takeaways from here.
Wait. Did you moved away from contracts? We haven't looked at the central offices. We were just looking at the schools, right? No. Yeah.
Oh, you don't have it here.
It's in 7, not in 8.
You don't
Here.
have it. Here you go.
Here, you want to share?
Here, you can take this.
Sorry, it's not in my binder. Okay, so this is then, 7B, and this is at the district office level.
Second one is 7.
So I'm wondering why Sweetwater Cares has an budget in here. Why would they have an unrestricted budget? Yeah, right about the middle, just right down here.
Water Cares, we've been working with, because the entity's being established, we're going through the process. Those are dollars that we will eventually transfer over once things are finalized with establishment at 501c3. It will then, the monies haven't moved yet. So the monies are still sitting in the district as restricted, and once everything is, we get the communication.
So we just got communications and actually it didn't get mailed to us. We've been bugging them, and so it is now officially on their website that Sweetwater Cares is a recognized 501c3 organization. Please, a shameless plug, more than welcome to make donations. Primary focus right now, foster and unaccompanied youth. But that money will be able to be transferred over as soon as we actually, the board opens a bank account and does those pieces, and then at that point it can transfer over. But expenditures are being made out of that line item because people have donated as it relates to that, so that it can be spent.
As you can see, just in terms of kind of starting from the top, we have it broken by resource. So you see the 0900 and the specific cost centers in which dollars are allocated for, particularly with, let's say, AVID, state and federal, kind of looking at that block. And then it goes into what we call the 4 zeros, unrestricted resource, and then separated again by cost center. Working with each of the directors or managers that oversee those respective areas during our budget development process, we work with them to see if there are any contracts that need to be identified. I'm trying to look at one area here, like at the CFO office, and I'm jumping to page 3 of the document. It's cost center 561, so I can kind of give that as an example. There's audit expense of about $115,000. That's related to our contract to meet compliance requirements. So I think you'll see a common theme with some of these areas in the district office. Some of them are compliance driven. Consultants that we have, there's $272,000, but that includes our financial advisor for our bond program. It also includes, we have our consultant or an outside party that comes and does inventory to meet education requirements on an annual basis. Then you see leases, those are for our copiers. And we look at these periodically to see when do our copiers come up, and we don't not only look at it at our department, we look at district-wide for those areas. And then there's other amounts here. So that's just a snapshot of what it is for like the CFO's office as an example. But a lot of it's very much compliance-driven requirements and contracts.
Like miscellaneous business activity on the middle of that page.
This is just current year.
This is current year. And so we use this when we build our multi-year for 2021. We look at these contracts. If we know that they've got increasing costs or things for whichever area, we work closely with those department leadership to go through and plan ahead, but we take this basis and factor that into next year.
So did you do any multi-year, and did you put together what it's been in the past and then what happened, because this is a reduced year? I would have liked to see how they operated for the last 5 years to see what really impacted the reduction, because I know it seems like not much, but in some of these budgets, and I'm sure at the school sites, that can be a really heavy hit. Even a 10%, is a big heavy hit. So I kind of would like to see what were the trends before, and yeah, we're living to this year, but is it really livable?
So we can certainly go back and do a 5-year view. How we approach the work for 1920 and as we move forward with 2021 is meeting with the directors and managers and saying, what is required? What is a fixed cost that is a must-have? And then we start to go through. So this past year, we went through each area and really kind of scrubbed it.
Exactly. So I'd like to see what happened before in the prior years when it wasn't just a must-have, because we can't operate like that going on. I mean, if we're talking about how we can become a livable institution that really provides the support, and we're going to reduce this year to get down to our essentials, but we know going forward, we have to operate with a reality, not just the least amount, right, for some of this stuff. I want to know both so we can see by this year we can get back to a really robust, providing for everything that we need. Right now we're going down to the essentials, but going forward, I think that's important that we also include in our vision when we recoup, so that we know, okay, we don't need to build reserves anymore. We can actually restore budgets to a livable place. And it will be totally different from that historical because costs rise and all that, but at least you can kind of see some what really happened. I don't think that would be bad.
So in most cases, district office budgets were slashed a lot with business and travel because we had eliminated out of the county, out of the state travel, and so a lot of the district offices budgets, you'll see just like site budgets, were cut back. There's not much under business and travel. That's one of the major things, but we can, if Jenny says we can get the 5-year.
It's not a rush, but I mean, I think it's a picture I would like to see what happened.
Maybe for the decisions that need to be made in.
Yeah, down the road, not right now.
Might be able to do a 1-year, prior year actuals.
And we can certainly, when we meet with the leadership team for each of these areas, what is it? 'Cause these are like, you have to have these for compliance purposes. We can certainly work with them. What else is not in there that we don't factor now that may need down the road? So we can kind of have that contingency.
One of the things that happens with compliance, and especially with some of the supplemental funding streams, is there's always justification why you need to spend it, but nobody else gets that privilege. You know what I'm saying? And so it becomes a very narrow field of who really gets to access the training and the workshops or the seminars or the conferences, because they have that special pot of money. So I really wanted us to be conscious of where is it that we really, did we used to do this stuff, and is there different ways we can widen that gap, widen that open for more people to participate, if that's an allowable cost under that resource, once we're, in that. But I want to also be mindful of who keeps getting to do what everybody else isn't getting to do. Because a lot of that is written into the very grants that they apply for, right? It's an assurance that they're going to get to really not have to do without while everybody else is.
This shouldn't come to anybody's surprise because I hear it all the time. Can somebody please explain to the public and to the people who are here what exactly is encompassed by the Equity, Culture, and Support Services Department? Because the word on the street is that that department occupies a lion's share of not only the district budget, but also the district personnel. And so can somebody shed some light on what exactly is equity and culture? Not necessarily everything that Dr. Fulcher is in charge of, which I think people assume is equity and culture, but it's really not. So can somebody make that distinction?
Yeah, so why don't maybe we move to the personnel reports that are part of 8?
I see it on the.
You see it in the 5,000?
I see it.
as well?
I see it
have
on
my
the
5,000.
sheet. It's.
This is not personnel, though, this is,
Okay, so you want me to save that until we get to personnel? Okay, then can I ask another question? On
forget though. We won't
no,
forget.
I won't let you. On number 604, legal services, I'm noticing that lawsuits. There's no total for lawsuits that we have to pay. Is that because? I mean, and I don't know. I don't remember which lawsuits come out of JPA and which lawsuits come out of the general fund. But shouldn't there be a listing of the lawsuits that we have settled that come out of general fund?
There's another page.
So as it relates to JPA, we
Is that
obviously.
under other legal fees? Is that what that is? I'm talking about lawsuits, our settlements.
settlements.
Our settlements.
So it depends on the type of settlement where it would be housed. So for example, one of the settlements we have as it relates to Title IX is under the Title IX section. So every year we have to pay $60,000 to legal aid at work. So you'll see that one of the pieces under there is that.
Yes, I see that, but I'm talking about the lawsuits that we have to settle.
Or special ed and things like
Well,
that.
but I'm talking about lawsuits that we have to
So
settle
as
for
it-
accidents, for whatever.
So as it relates to the fees, when you look under risk management, and I believe there's a couple other line items that deal with JPAs that don't fall into my area, that talk about our encumbrances. So we would need to look for part of that on the JPA, some of that as it relates to legal fees associated with cases or parent settlements and due process, that would be in our area. If it's an actual special ed service that's being provided, that comes out of special ed actual services, because it would have been services we're providing to students. So you wouldn't see it delineated. We don't have a pot for it.
As a settlement.
We don't have it, exactly. And so it really depends on the type. So for example, if a wage claim comes in that is paid, that comes out of payroll expenses and personnel expenditures. So it wouldn't come out of, there isn't a line item that says wage claims. There isn't a line item that says settlement agreements because a smart person would then look and say, oh, well, it tells me you have this much to settle all your lawsuits. So really, from a JPA perspective, as folks that look at our budget, it's transparent. Folks really with the JPA perspective, we pay the first $100,000 of a claim. So potentially we have retainers. We put into our budget the JPA looks at us. They have a certain amount that they have us put in every year annually towards what they believe our contributions towards settlements in lawsuits are going to be. And we really start there. And then when the JPA determines we're not at a place where we're trued up, they will come and the county office has an ability just to come into our budget and take money out. And so that's what happens with the JPA. We will just see a journal voucher entry of an additional amount of money, and we'll get a settle up kind of sheet that says, we had allocated, you needed X on this lawsuit. We've already expended more than that in this service or in the actual settlement, and we will pay up. But it really is set. One of the benefits of being in the JPA is that unless you settle above $55 million, your cap of what you're spending on your settlement is $100,000, and it's managed through those contributions to the JPA. So you will not see a specific line item other than what we contribute in our workers' comp costs, because obviously there's formularies that we make to determine what we pay in workers' comp settlements that's built into our contribution, and similarly with the JPA.
Thank you, that helps.
So I have a couple questions. So on, just kind of want to get a bit of understanding of under 682, what the consultants, what are those consultants that we have like for $419,000?
That's under resource, so that's part of our LCAP. So those are dollars that are earmarked there, so I'm not sure if that's
Just so I can understand what that is.
It's on the first page you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yes.
On the first page.
Yeah.
682.
So what consultants, Dr. Fulcher, is coming out of the LCAP to do the work?
I'm not quite at that page yet, but I can.
Exhibit 7B.
Okay.
It's in the middle. 682. Assistant Superintendent of Equity, Culture, and Discipline.
Let me just talk a little bit about who those consultants are, even though I'm still trying to find that page.
Sure.
We bring in, for instance, the National Conflict Resolution Center to work with our staff, and I may add that most of these services are received at a cut rate price, in large part because of the relationship we've established with these people over the past. So we have the National Conflict Resolution Center who works with all staff in the district. We also bring in the National Equity Project. They've done some work with both our leadership teams and teachers alike. Worked more recently with our culture and climate committees. We also have, as a part of those contracts, some of the work with our teen court consultant. He has provided services to the district for, at least 3 years. And as you know, we run and operate teen court in this very room and also at a number of schools as well. Ernie Mendez is another person who has been brought in by some schools as well as the district office. He continues to provide support in a number of real basic areas around challenging behaviors, and there's about 3 or 4 other areas related to restorative work that he's done. We have an arrangement, again, with the National Conflict Resolution Center to provide some work around restorative practices. And Ms. Hall, you mentioned something earlier that I'd like to respond to. We've trained about 700 staff. Most of them are teachers, so we want the work to be done in the classroom. It's about building relationships. And we still see that some students just don't, for whatever reason, feel comfortable in traditional environments. So they end up at alternative programs or in charters or some other place. So we want to continue to focus on that at least this year so we can make sure those students not just to have their needs met, their physiological needs met, as Maslow has talked about, but also feel safe and that they belong in schools. So we will continue to work on some of those social-emotional areas, which also includes one training in our social-emotional supports that we provided at the beginning of the year for our management team as we kind of kicked off a year of pretty intensive focus on our social-emotional learning curriculum. So those are a few of the areas that we have utilized the LCAP funding for. We have a very modest budget, as I said. It's usually around $177,000. That's what it's been for the past 3 years. And the only way we can bring these people in, and some of them, as you know, have spoken at our equity symposiums at the very beginning of the year. We've also brought people in at the middle of the year. The only way we can bring these folks in is because they, in the relationship we've established, they do it for a minimal or nominal fee.
So, can I just follow up on that? Just so, I appreciate that, and that's still a lot of money. Is there a point? And I understand that the benefit of speakers, but if we're going to really try to save money places, I think we could save there possibly, and maybe pausing there, and then are there train the trainer type? Is that what you were saying earlier, Dr. Fulcher? Where it's happening in the classroom all the time. We're not that sort of thing.
Yeah, with the exception of the symposium, all the other training is train the trainer. We want our staff to implement the work in the classroom, so you don't want to have to keep sending folks to the training in order to do the work or do the job. So it's to build their skills and capacity. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons and we'll talk about the structure of the department a little later, but one of the reasons we have provided so much training for the staff in the equity office is so they can do the training as opposed to hiring outside personnel or outside organizations to come in and do the work. So we want to do two things, or we have done two things. We build the skills of those who work in the office, and then we want to certainly expand and build the skills of those who are participating in the training, so they won't have to continue coming to the training time after time again, and they can implement that work on their own.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm not. I just want to make clear that I'm not just looking at what's in that department as far as consultants, because I think overall we should really be looking at limiting consultants, utilizing consultants anywhere we can. And I know we have a number of them. There's a number of them that's going to hurt, but wherever we can reel that back a little, at least while we're in this mode, that I think it would be helpful for us to help balance the budget going forward.
So thank you, Mr. Segura. I think I was looking at some other contracted services that have, or consultants, and it looks like there's, student services has some. That's mostly, what is that, nurses and psychology? Does that live in your department, those contracted services? Some of them might be with mental health.
And that's not a part of the equity office. It's a part of the support services office, which I oversee. And some of those contracts out of student services may deal with our Edu Abroad, for instance, and that work is with our students who are a part of the exchange program. We also provide some services around, it's the positive behavioral supports and intervention. And there are a few other areas that I can certainly look up and get back to you on.
Does the MOUs with the sheriffs and police?
All that's in student services, yeah, and it's probably around 300 or so thousand for all the agencies. We also have the collaborative work that's being done, and that's with the Chula Vista Collaborative as well as South Bay Community Services. and some of that work, well, all of that work is being overseen by the Student Services Office.
Okay. So that,
Pike, sorry. Just going to reach out to Trustee Pike and Trustee Solis to see if there's any questions there.
No.
I had one more on 637. Little explanation on more of what the telephone data lines is, and is that like what I'm trying to figure out is that I know we have leases with Data Matrix, I think it is, or somebody that we've had for a few years, or if that's not it, where is that at? Because I think that's coming up, and if there's a way that we can go out to different people, including looking at the county services, maybe anywhere we could save money, but I'm trying to figure out what that all entails.
It's 1 million. Yeah. 67.
Good evening. I'm still trying to locate the actual line item here. Are you talking about communications and utilities?
Yes.
Telephone
Line,
lines and
data
data
lines.
lines? That's basically all the telecommunications point to point from our scale matrix to all the school sites. That's a needed. That's not a want to have. So all of our communications that we provide in terms of information being exchanged to the schools and back, and to have it cross department wise, those are the telecommunications. That also includes voice. Now those costs are high because we're running two networks. We want to get to a voice over IP network so that both our data and voice run over one network. Unfortunately, that's not the case. We only have about 7 schools that are on voice over IP. It takes money to convert that over, and we've been trying to do that over a 5 to 7 year period to try to minimize the cost. But we're basically supporting 2 networks, and that's added resources, both from a resource standpoint and physical telecommunications resource. So yes, we can take a look at San Diego County Office of Education too. Includes San Diego Unified also provides services, but their services are not comparable to what we're doing at Scale Matrix nor our voice over IP network. So it would probably cost a great deal more to try to convert in that regard, as opposed to implementing our plan, which is really to get to a voice over IP network. Unfortunately, because of our challenges right now, we can't get to that point. So what we're trying to do is maintain what we have and to extend the life of existing equipment. But those services, that $1 million that's noted there, that's basically all of our telecommunications data points, point-to-point telecommunication lines between all our sites to our primary data center, as well as to Moss Street, which is also a hub for the entire school district.
If I could add too, because you've got consultants there for $35,750. That is for services for our E-rate applications.
That's correct, yes.
That's another component too. So in order for the district to receive those monies, this consultant works closely with the FCC and
That's
has
right.
that.
And that's a very minimal amount based on the types of funds that we're getting. We're 80% free and reduced, so we're getting considerable amount of money from the USDA.
So just to clarify, did you say that our contract with Data Matrix or Scale? What you?
It's Scale Matrix.
Scale
over
Matrix
in
is that in? Is their cost or their contract in that $1 million? Or is that a different?
I would have to take a look at the details, Dr. Salkeld. I don't know if it is included.
That's a different cost center, so it's probably
Matrix.
525. Yes, it's in that part of that 2.5 million of the cost center 525. Under leases, repairs, equipment.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
That's the component that has Scale Matrix.
Right, and that basically that 176. Okay, it's probably in the 2.5 because the annual or monthly cost to maintain the Scale Matrix data center is $176,000. And again, that was supposed to be a temporary solution until we had a data center on L Street, but that never materialized, and so we have to continue on with those operations. And again, moving those operations to another operations is not an overnight operation. It's probably a good 6 to 9 month endeavor.
When does that contract end with scale matrix or data matrix where we could see if it's feasible and if it's going to save us, any money where it's worthwhile to actually, consider that.
The scale matrix contract terminates
I'll write it
in
down this time.
April 20th of this year.
Oh.
And there is a board item that's going in on January 27th to extend that lease. Keep in mind, that is every component that is executed by this district. Every application, every server, every device that runs on our network, our wireless network is based there, our telecommunications network is based there, our virtual servers are based there, our voice and telecom virtual servers are based there. And so those things that run over voice over IP, that's also based there. And again, this agreement from the 176 monthly, that came down from a 1.2 when we were negotiating with them 3 years. We obviously negotiated to see if we can maintain that price for another 3 years, and they were very collaborative in that regard.
Oh, that's great.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
I have a couple questions, and I don't know if they're for David or for Mr. Winters, but one of the components of, one of the first things we did in the first spring, I think it was May of 2015, was vote on what was supposed to be the end-all, have-to-have-it students' information system that was going to replace everything in Infinite Campus. We approved under, that board item quite a large expense for that that system,
Yes.
and yet we're still running 3 different systems. So kind of give me, why haven't we moved away from that? I know that it's popular, but we have a financial problem. So in your mind, which one is the one that we would have to maintain?
I can give you my perspective from a technical infrastructure standpoint, and then Dr. Winters would like to contribute.
Just to be clear, are you asking about the grading programs?
The grade book?
Jupyter Grades,
Grades
Canvas?
and Canvas.
Yeah, okay.
So in terms
I
of,
get that teachers like one or the other, and
yes,
but we can't operate giving everybody what they want, and we have to do what's right. So I need to
Yes,
know
ma'am.
more about.
the Infinite Campus does have a grade book, and it's part of the $521,000 that we're charged annually for the entire system. Okay, there are 3 grade books, two other graded books that are used, basically Canvas and basically Jupyter Grades. Jupyter Grades, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Salkeld, it's about $62,000. From a Canvas standpoint, I think we've negotiated down and reduced that price for the entire system, not just for the grade book, to about $200,000. So, okay. So
How much? 200?
how much was that?
60,000 this year, the 80 next year.
Okay, all right. So basically, 140,000 over this year and next year.
Oh, so the 525, was that what you said was?
Is Infinite Campus, the entire Infinite Campus system, yes. And again, a component of that is gradebook. If we stop using that gradebook, there isn't really no cost savings associated to that. So if we're looking at it from a financial perspective, we would have to take a look at the other 2.
So are grades maintained in Infinite Campus?
That's correct, they are
And
maintained.
that's where the transcripts live?
Yes, ma'am. And then
Right.
those other systems.
That is where we replaced, supposedly we were going to replace. But we haven't, because the comfort of certain things that the elements of these other 2 systems provide. Correct?
Yes.
Are they both, like, I thought, we were presented Infinite Campus, like everything else was dying and going away because it was by June 30th of 2015, those systems were done. They were done operating, they were done. Those vendors were gone, never to appear again. So I was really surprised when we kept hearing that we were still maintaining. I get why people really like it, but I thought it was, it was sold to us like we had to make that decision. So
Yeah,
now I want to know who maintains these systems and how long do you think they're going to last?
The grade book is only a small component of the entire student information system. And so just looking at that, there's pros and cons associated to, for example, Canvas and Jupyter. Canvas, it's a learning management system. And so consequently, there's our curriculum or strategy associated to that. And again, Dr. Alvarez and Dr. Winters can speak on that. Basically, that was supposed to be a foundation for moving forward with strategically how we were going to integrate information. Jupyter Grades is basically a popular grade book. People don't like change, and so consequently there were some advantages of the knowledge base there. And again, most of the school sites use Jupyter Grades.
Well, I think the parent component of that was also a factor, right? But what I want to know is how long are these vendors viable? Do you have you looked at that at all?
For the viability of these products, so they're not overnight. Basically, Jupyter Grades has been in the industry for some time. So is Canvas. Infinite Campus isn't going to go away. The particular issue that we have, and I guess that's basically us as a district, is that we continue to build silos of information, systems that aren't integrated. So it makes it very difficult to support and to maintain.
And you had a lot of modifications that you made to Infinite Campus since you came on board. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you have to maintain those.
We have to maintain that. That's correct.
Okay.
Just for clarification, so I think what we're talking about here is Infinite Campus is a student information system. It is the total system, and Jupyter Grades and Canvas, they are grade books or a learning management system for Canvas.
Yes.
And what I think Mrs. Hall went away in 2015 was Power School. That was the student information system that Sweetwater was on before. That's what was going to go away at the end of that year. I wasn't here, but that's my recollection from David D'Amico. And people in the audience could probably add into that, chime into that. But,
okay.
And so Jupyter Grades and Canvas was...
The fact is that the priciness of the Infinite Campus and what was presented to us was that it was going to be all-inclusive of everything that we needed. But it isn't. Obviously, we're still operating these other... So what other kind of systems like that are we operating that are just because people can't let go of them?
All right, so I think the question on the table then that becomes for staff to consider is where are those opportunities for some efficiency where we might have been able to afford previously multiple models because that essentially got to preference and choice, and now we're going to be eliminating some of that preference and choice in order to make room for the high need items in terms of our resource allocations. And so that can be an item, a question that becomes a consideration point for staff.
So the next item in
this
your
is a lot.
binder is Exhibit A. Go back to this one. So this one's what I was mentioning earlier. It's quite lengthy, but a couple of elements, and this is the district office. So this looks at each of the departments and the personnel supporting the respective work in that area. One thing to note here, which ties to one of those reference sheets in the beginning of the binder, you'll see that the data, so I'm going to use accounts payable as the example, that's the first department noted there. You see that there's a 222 notation there. It says for the accounting manager, and then 260 for the rest of the staff. That is a reference to our district's work calendar for those particular positions. So we have the detail in the front reference that shows all of the positions by particular work year. And then what you also see is how that position, this is where you're going to start seeing, particularly at the district office, some positions could be split funded by different funding sources. This here, you will see that you've got the county manager is a 40, so that's the unrestricted. That's why that reference on that prior tab will be helpful. We do have some staff, accounting assistants, that do support our child nutrition program. So we have some that are funded by the 5310 resource that's specific to that fund, our cafeteria fund. And then you also see there's a column for the FTEs. So in total for accounts payable, as an example, there are 8 FTEs that help support in the processing of the district invoices to meet the vendor obligations and also to meet the new requirements over the last year with the county office, the fiscal accountability. So that work is done by that team of 8 for all funds district-wide, not just the general fund, all of our other operating or particular funds, restricted funds. So that's an example of one department. If you go then to the next page, it's actually page 3, because I want to complement that with Exhibit 8B. Our alternative education department, this is all inclusive of the services provided there. And then you have that Exhibit 8B, which is the learning centers as a standalone. And I think this, again, there's a lot of detail by department, but I think as Trustee Tarantino mentioned earlier regarding the equity and culture department, that's an area too that if you wanted to note about the positions, that's reflected here too. You know, we don't put page numbers. Yeah, we'll put page numbers on there. Next, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the bottom at the bottom of the 6th page at the bottom. Mm-hmm.
Maybe run through this one as a
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Can someone provide some clarification as to what exactly is encompassed in equity and culture as opposed to everything else that Dr. Fulcher is in charge of?
The bottom of page 6. We'll put page numbers.
I'd be happy to address it. The equity office has a total of 3 staff, myself and 2 TOSAs.
So with all due respect, Dr. Fulcher, when people say that you have an empire and that you are monopolizing district resources, where do you think that that's coming? I have an idea of where that's coming from, but what's your opinion? Because I'm sure you've heard that too.
I have
I'm
heard
sorry,
it.
I'm not looking at you. Let me turn.
That's okay. And I do have an opinion about where that's coming from. Some I'll share, some I won't. But what I will say is at one point we had a high of 5 staff in that office. We had a program manager and another TOSA. The TOSA left the district and is now working in LA County. The program manager we had, who was excellent, is now responsible for our homeless and foster youth office. So we're down to 3. And again, with those 3, and I mentioned earlier, and I found the section I was looking for earlier as well, we have the $177,000 for the consultants. There are a couple of other offices, and this is mostly because of paperwork matter, that are listed under equity culture, but really are part of support services. And that would be John Chikowski in our safety and security office. Some of his security work group training is paid for out of those consultants that you read earlier. The mental health office that we created a few years ago, paid for out of county funds, primarily. County office. Right. San Diego County funds is also listed and hasn't been in the past under the equity office. It's mostly, I think, for maybe paperwork or structural purposes. And then our foster and homeless youth are also listed there. So some of the consultant fees that you saw earlier were coming from that budget. And, you know, as far as being a target, you know, I was born in this country a long time ago. I've had a target on my back since I was born. So that's probably no big thing to me. but when it impacts, some of the people I work with, which it does, then I kind of have to respond and rebuff some of those statements. I don't have an empire. I inherited a lot of these departments from another person who was in the district who has since retired. And believe me, I love the work. I have a great team. And if I didn't have a great team, it would be a huge challenge to oversee the number of departments I have. So I give them a great deal of respect, kudos, and a lot of latitude when I can. One's in the audience, Ryan Burke. He's done a masterful job with adult ed. As you know, we lost one of our directors for the alternative ed program, so I've been directly working with that group, and in addition to Mercedes Lopez providing some support for independent studies. So again, I have my theories on why this man has been targeted in many ways, but I will reserve those for another conversation.
Fulcher, could you just expand a little more about, because on this list right here on that same page talks about licensed mental health clinicians. Can you explain to the audience and to the board where that fits into the work?
The hope is that we have a mental health clinician at every high school at some point who can provide support to the entire that whole framework, I guess, at the high school level and the middle school level, that feeder pattern. We're still a few therapists away from that. In most cases, they have a fairly large caseload, and they're providing support to our students who could be clinically depressed. Some could be schizophrenic. Others may have anxiety, severe anxiety that prevents them from coming to school. So we have a whole range of psychological issues that these folks are dealing with. You also see in these categories, in these areas, our ERMS therapists, and their primary responsibility is working with our students with disabilities who have on their IEPs a need for some additional mental health services. So we're far from a full service department, but I think with the continued county funding and the growth of, there's certainly a need, we can provide services to all the students we hope in the district who need those services.
Thank you, Dr. Fulcher. So the answer is 3 versus an empire. Is that correct?
And unless someone defines 3 as an empire, then we certainly fall short of that.
Thank you.
I think sometimes, too, what happens is that people just see positions and may not understand how positions are being funded. And so what this list is also trying to do is to help the board and the public at large, staff and community, understand where the funding comes from, right? Because if it's unrestricted, we know it's coming from our general fund. If it's Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, it's coming from our federal funds, right? And so that's different monies than our general fund. And I just think it's complicated, but it's helpful to know and understand. And I think it's great, and I really appreciate how the staff has put this together to help people see how each of these positions are funded as well. So thank you.
Is there any other department specifically you'd want to look at together as a group?
So I just want to understand the alternative education a little better. So that does include the independent studies and the learning centers. That's that whole area that's within there.
This was just independent studies. Then you have a separate schedule that focuses on the learning centers. That's the next exhibit 8B expands onto the learning centers.
I mean, the alternative ed.
Second.
No.
So the alternative education under this district office includes only independent study, home hospital, and it's both certificated and classified. And then, like Dr. Salkeld said, there's a separate 8B, which just breaks down the learning centers because they don't come under the district office per se. Yeah, but it is under Dr. Fulcher, and it is under alternative ed, as well as Palomar, East Hills Academy, Alta Vista options are all under alternative ed, under Dr. Fulcher, but they're going to be on a different page here. This is just district departments.
So the 8 FTE for the secondary classroom teachers are all, that's not home hospital because that's listed before, you only have 1 FTE. The 8, can you kind of help me with understanding why they're in the central office and not at a school site or at a location that's more connected directly with students?
So those are I'm presuming are independent studies teachers, and they serve students from across our district, from middle to high school level. And so because of that, they're not assigned or aligned to any school, any specific school.
So how do they report to who?
They report to the alternative ed office. However, this year they're reporting directly to who's providing some support to Mercedes Lopez.
Okay. And do they operate out of say if you're on independent study in the southwest area, you would be going to Southwest High to see this teacher?
So we have a combination of ways services are delivered. We do have some satellite locations, but we also have support available at the central office, which is on Moss Street, the alternative ed central office. And usually, we like to keep students as close to their community or neighborhood schools as possible, but in some cases, because of a number of issues and variables, they need some space from their schools and communities, and they can be serviced at the Mall Street office.
So could you explain again to me, I mean, I heard it addressed, but the options and East Hills, those are under you?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I don't want anybody to feel like we're attacking a certain person or, you don't really know how we came up with our questions. And I would hope that, it isn't taken personally as an attack on a person. Because this is a $35-40 million problem we're looking at here, and we have to look at everything and pull apart every layer and ask the questions in order to understand it. It's exactly why I asked for this work to be done, so that we could gain an understanding, because some things we can't do any longer.
Appreciate that, and I'm certainly not taking any of this personally. I'm not sure if you're referring to me, but if you are, I'm not taking it personally.
No, I think one of the things I appreciate about these opportunities to clarify things like it's what some might have considered an empire because they were making assumptions about what they're looking at. Now they understand. We're not looking at an empire. So thank you so much for asking that question. And is there...
So last question I have around this is, so what I was trying to understand is, so I understand we have a number of learning centers at various high schools, right? Is it all high schools? So I want to see the enrollment for every school. Is that in here? And then
Under your reference documents.
so if we could show me where that's at?
Section 2.
Yeah.
At the bottom are the learning centers, and these were numbers as of our budget development.
That's in this. That's in here.
1920. Section 2, tab 2. Exhibit A. So if you go down to the bottom, you see learning centers, and these are numbers that for 1920. What we use for budget development. Tab 2. And then we put a point of reference for our day 10 when we're monitoring the first few days of school.
They're going to look a little differently than this right now, because this was as of day 10.
So do these, so like say San Isidro, they have a very successful learning center. I'm sure a number of these do, but so are they all staffed the same? So if you have 143 at one school and you have 74 at another, do they have the same amount of everybody?
No, they don't.
So where would that be listed? I want to see where it says who's at what school.
The allocation.
And that goes back to Exhibit 8B, where you see the detail of staffing by school.
What I'm getting at is like if there's a way to, combine some of these centers so that where, like, for example, San Isidro has 143, they have a full load there. Like if we combine Olympian and Otay Ranch, I mean, there's two, you can make that one center or possibly look at that. I don't know, that's where I'm going with this, is to try to find ways to save money.
We were talking about that with our general counsel not long ago, as a matter of fact, who had some questions about the structure of the learning centers. One of the things
let me just say this, Dr. Fulcher, and I am a big believer in that. I have a son that's in that program, and that's the only reason why he's going to graduate is because, he's from when he started high school. Actually, from before he even started high school, I knew the classroom wasn't our traditional classroom is not a place where he learns. Get him outside of that, and he'll learn that. He'll outlearn everybody in here. He's just that way. But I made him go there actually. So I'm a big supporter of that. I'm just, so I'm not trying to target it, but I just want to know, I got to look at every option. We have to look at every option possible. So I just wanted to add that, sir.
Yeah, I hope I'm not sounding defensive. If
You're not.
I am, okay. I apologize if I
think you
am.
were for
I
a
may
little
be
while.
passionate, but I hope I'm not sounding defensive. So we've had conversations about consolidating services. We still think that the best approach, and we realize we're in a unique situation, is to provide services as close to where those kids live as possible. For instance, at Sweetwater High, and I've mentioned this in the past, many of those students struggle with attending any alternative program outside of their community. So when and where possible, we'd like to keep it as close to the high school as we can. Now that, of course, is in great and better times. Right now, we're looking at everything. So we have a small group of staff, Learning Center staff, looking at different ways to align our services with the needs of our students. And we're looking at things like the curriculum, the resources we provide our students and staff. We're looking at what kind of supports we can provide our families. So there's a number of things that we're entertaining, including potential or possible consolidation.
All right, so I'm going to just pause for a second because we have a few more documents that we just want to walk you through so that you know what you have. We've got our list of questions that you've asked so far that we know to bring back, but I do want to provide that opportunity so as you're looking at your materials and preparing for next week, you know exactly what it is you're looking at.
Can you also, in here, do you have the formula that they referred to earlier in the open comments about what's been sent out and how that formula for next year, the preliminary?
The staffing allocations
Yes.
are not included in this package here.
Yeah.
So the next one is Exhibit 8C. Dr. Jenny, do you want to touch upon this one? This is the induction. This is a program, too, that we've been looking at.
Sure.
It is funded primarily by Title II.
Sure. It is funded by Title II. Originally, when we reinstated the induction program in Sweetwater, it was through the Educator Effectiveness Grant. And then when that grant finished, it became a general fund expenditure, and this past year was transferred over to Title II. So all induction is being funded out of Title II at this point in time. Sometimes we understood that there was even a misunderstanding about the numbers of people, sort of like the Empire for Dr. Fulcher. The misunderstanding about how many teachers full-time teachers are actually in the induction program, besides the teachers themselves that are new teachers. We started out with 3 full-time teachers, TOSAs, resource teachers, out of the classroom supporting that program. We're down to 1. One of those teachers was hired as an assistant principal this year, which left us with 2, and 1 just left at the semester, so we're now down to 1 teacher to support a couple of hundred teachers. In addition to that, we have 3 part-time teachers. They're 0.6, so 3 periods of their day are used towards supporting new teachers. And then we have approximately 40 additional teachers who are funded, I got that number today, about 40 teachers, funded extra duty to support new teachers across the district. Because with 200 or so new teachers, those one full-time person and 3 part-time would not be able to support those people. And so typically, you usually have in programs like this, a couple of teachers out full-time, a couple of teachers part-time, and the rest are supported by extra duty of teachers across the campus. Typically, teachers that are at their school site or within a close proximity.
How does that differ from a PLC?
A PLC?
Yeah.
A professional learning community is site-based and it's content-based. Courses, typically course-alikes. Induction programs are supporting new teachers with the fundamentals of teaching. And every teacher that gets credentialed in the state of California has to go through some kind of induction program, whether it's offered by the district or by...
It's mandated by law.
It is mandated.
So I'm wondering how we can use Title II for that, because it is a mandate. But anyway...
So can I speak to that?
Yeah.
Hang on a second. Go ahead and finish, Mrs. Hall.
No, I will go ahead and tell me so I have the answer to the mandate part, and then I'll finish
all teachers are required to clear their credential and therefore participate in an induction program. As of this point, while there's been efforts in the legislature to pass law that requires a district to take responsibility for that, as of this point, districts individually make that choice. So it is not a requirement by law that we offer it. It's a requirement by law that the teacher clears their credential.
Okay, that makes sense. But again, I see some of these things are options, right? Because I know that this is a conversation that always is addressed in when the recession hit, before the recession hit, in my own work, I've experienced over that. And I know that there's a program run at the county with this too, right? Because some districts don't have their own program. Teachers are responsible for it themselves. Is that correct?
If a district doesn't offer an induction program, then a teacher's responsible for going through a university or some other entity that is authorized to provide the induction program. You have to be certified.
All right. And you have to be, at what point are you not cleared for your credential? Is that when you first come into the district?
You have 5 years to clear your
5 years
credential.
to clear it. And so 5 years that you're working, or 5 years from the time you graduate, or?
5 years from the point that you get a position.
Okay, so if your position is gone, what does that do to your program?
You mean if a teacher gets laid off?
Yes.
And they don't have a job in our district or any other district, then it would be put on hold.
So they're on hold until they have a job, and then they can restart maybe not from the beginning, but from the point they had completed whatever work they'd done.
Yeah, I'm not totally clear on that, but we can get you that information.
Well, I don't need to, I mean, the one thing about this, and I hear a lot of chatter out there on both sides. I mean, I understand the need to support teachers, but it seems like when we're looking at reducing staff, the first people we know are the most vulnerable people as far as workers. It's the newest people. So if the newest people are gone.
So that will, all depend. Last year we did have an agreement with our labor partners that if we laid off even one person, then the induction program would be suspended. And so when we get to that point, it will be suspended, and we'll have to figure out what happens, because we will have probably teachers who will remain in our district.
I think that what I find that we keep hitting this kind of a repeat action is that you should be already moving to resolve those conversations already. Here's we are. Where are we with this agreement? Because we suspect that these things are going to happen, so that you're ready to put it into action and not wait for another 6 months. Because you know what? If you'd really planned, we wouldn't be here right now. We would have resolved the deficit already.
Okay, so why don't we, I think you've worked your way through all of the documents. Is there one more missing?
So
I feel like there was one more
under
missing.
this section, we have program managers. That's Exhibit 8D. So that's across different funding sources as well. And then we also have Exhibit 8E, which has a listing of all the directors.
And the only other one I do want to highlight is you've got under Section 6, a memo describing how we use our title dollars, which I think might be helpful in understanding the dollars coming in, how they're currently used, and may be helpful in formulating some of those questions that follow from it. All right, so I'm going to pause us there. You'll have an opportunity to continue looking at the documents. I've got, if we can go back to the slide deck. I've made note of the request for information starting from the point in time where we're talking about getting to that 2-year target and what that would look like. The board policies on reserve samples, what opportunities exist for right sizing versus restructuring, including reconfiguring at the assistant superintendent level, keeping in mind compliance and implementation of best practice. How do we not lose ground on the things that we've gained ground on? And so I've jotted them all down. I will put them together in some notes and share them with Dr. Janney to share with you to make sure we haven't missed anything. And then to that, I would ask you to add anything else that you need as a board to be able to make the decisions you're going to need to make in February. And so it's that opportunity to say, also interested in the staffing allocations piece that was mentioned earlier. What do those per pupil allocations actually look like at the school sites? Maybe we can't get the 5-year prior actuals, but maybe we can get to 1 year prior actuals to look at some of those 5,000s. And so figuring out all those pieces that we can put together for you so that you can make the hard decisions that you're going to have to make in a month.
I don't think I need, I'm sorry, but I really don't need the prior year stuff for this activity. That's just for our knowledge.
For knowledge.
When we go forward, because right now we can't afford to give any.
Got it. So I've made note of those. I'll write them up so they're nice and neat, and then I would invite the board to continue adding to it. So if there's something that you didn't have an opportunity to ask for that you would find helpful, it would be your opportunity to add to it. Yes, sir.
Updated district flow chart, organizational chart.
Updated district.
Because online, some of them don't have the detail. They're just too high level.
Or you're looking at management, certificate, and classified.
I don't know.
So it's not in the chart.
See, I'm visual. I have to see it played out as opposed to linear like this. I don't see it like this. Just like I don't read maps. Right, Deanne? I can't see maps, so I need something visual.
Are you done, Mr. Tarantino? So I was just going to add, and now I lost it. Oh, so one of the things I was going to ask is, how are we getting our labor partners' input on this? I'd like to know that, and if you're meeting with them or how we're acquiring their input. And as far as I know as far as we didn't even talk about like principals and assistant principals at schools and how we're gonna. If I know at Unified they do like their schools, they have the high school has 2 assistants, their middle schools have 1, and what that would look like and how much that would save us in our district.
Okay. Those are items we have in here, Dr. Janney, but we can push that to we can defer that to the next workshop. We do have under section, section 10 has those particulars.
You've got the information there, and then we can have the conversation on Wednesday.
Next meeting. Yes, sir.
The SEA president mentioned that there is, or she would like to see, an LCFF/budget advisory group. Is that in the works? Is that something that can be established? Where are we with that? Is there being consideration given to that?
Yeah, I mentioned it at the last board meeting in December that there is what we're calling a budget advisory committee, which will consist of 3 SEA members, 1 SCGA member, 3 CSEA members, 1 NAGE, 2 principals, 5 parents, community members, and 5 students.
So that is in the works?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
They will, the question at the last meeting was who will choose their members. They will choose their representatives from each of the groups.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and just so in your slide deck, there we did include a timeline, and so I do invite you to take a look at that timeline. And in your handouts, there's also the timeline, and so if there are thoughts, timing-wise or input-wise, as you're thinking about stakeholders, that's different from what you're saying. Obviously, staff would love to hear that in terms of guidance from you as well. Did you have something, sir?
No.
Oh, okay. I heard you take a breath.
Listening.
Okay. All right, and we are at time, and I recognize that. So here's where we were hoping to get to the end. We didn't get to cover all of the topics. We will pick those up on Wednesday. But just a quick check of the hands. I'm looking to see, did the board have an opportunity to voice their ideas?
Yes.
Ask questions?
Yep.
And we're taking more. And provide some guidance on some of that prioritization so that staff has that opportunity to go back, take what you've said is important, take the targets that you've indicated are the right targets, and to bring something back to you.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes. No, we're not finished. No, not done. Yes. All right, with that.
I'd like to thank everybody for sticking around and let the record show that our fiscal advisor, Dr. Scavarna, is in the audience, and he stayed the whole time. So thank you, Dr. Scavarna, for being here and staying through this. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting.